frustrated. "Hey, Carter, you sure you won't blow up that rifle like your husband blew up secrets?" Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb laughs mockingly from the armory workshop doorway, his voice loud enough for all 12 personnel in the Fort Bragg weapons facility to hear clearly, reflective. Helen Carter didn't turn around, the heavy scent of CLP gun oil filling the 6 a.m. air, radio still broadcasting range cold from the firing range 200 yards away, her fingers continuing to glide over the bolt carrier group of the M4 carbine with perfect finger discipline. She continued turning the torque wrench precisely 25 foot-pounds, according to specification, eyes focused on the safety checklist on her clipboard without needing to consult the manual, habits of checking chamber and brass clearance like she'd done thousands of times before. Outside, formation was preparing for weapons qualification course, but Colonel Morrison stood at a distance, tapping his combat boot toe lightly and glancing at his watch. Nervous tells only a trained observer would recognize, pauses, until the radio crackled with a message that made the entire range suddenly fall silent.
Hamilton 1026 at last transmit.
Dramatic tone. The morning air at Fort Bragg carried the familiar mix of diesel exhaust from Humvees and the metallic tang of gun oil that had soaked into every surface of the weapons facility over decades of use. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the armory workshop, casting harsh shadows across workbenches lined with disassembled rifle components, cleaning rods, and precision tools, reflective. Helen Carter had arrived at 0530 hours, 30 minutes before the official start of the weapons maintenance shift, a habit that had served her well in her 3 years as a civilian contractor at the base. Ig. Webb's cruel words hung in the air like smoke from a misfired round. The 12 personnel in the workshop, a mix of armorers, technicians, and soldiers preparing for qualification, pretended to focus on their tasks while stealing glances at Helen. Some looked uncomfortable with Webb's harassment, but none spoke up. The moral vacuum was palpable, a collective failure to uphold the standards that military personnel were supposed to embody. Helen's response was silence and professionalism. She completed the torque specification on the barrel nut, her movements economical and precise. Every motion spoke of extensive training and experience that went far beyond what a typical weapons technician would possess. She checked the chamber with the practiced ease of someone who had performed thousands of similar inspections, her finger automatically finding the magazine release to ensure the weapon was completely clear. Range control, rifle number 7 maintenance complete, safety protocols verified, chamber clear and locked. Helen spoke into her shoulder-mounted radio, her voice steady and professional. The radio discipline was flawless, no unnecessary chatter, proper call signs, clear pronunciation that cut through static. Staff Sergeant Webb stepped further into the workshop, emboldened by the lack of resistance. "I'm serious, Carter. Maybe stick to filing paperwork. Leave the real weapons work to people who actually belong in the military." His comment drew a few uncomfortable chuckles from younger soldiers who felt pressured to show allegiance to a senior NCO, even when his behavior clearly violated Army values. Helen methodically placed the torque wrench back in its designated slot in the tool rack, each tool returning to its precise location. Her tool organization was military standard perfect. Every item had a place, and everything was in its place. She picked up the next weapon from the maintenance queue, an M4 carbine that had been flagged for trigger mechanism inspection. Outside the workshop, the sounds of a military base coming to life filled the morning air. Boots marched in formation on concrete, diesel engines rumbled to life in the motor pool, and the distant sound of PT formations calling cadence echoed across the compound. But inside the weapons facility, an uncomfortable tension had settled over the workspace. Chief Warrant Officer Torres entered the workshop carrying his morning coffee and a clipboard, thick with inspection schedules. At 48 years old, Torres had spent 26 years in the Army, starting as an enlisted soldier and working his way up through the warrant officer ranks. He'd seen enough harassment and unprofessional behavior to recognize it immediately, but he also understood the delicate dynamics of dealing with senior NCOs who had their own power bases within the unit. "Morning, people," Torres announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We've got 38 weapons scheduled for qualification prep today, and range time starts at 0800 hours. I need everything squared away and inspected before we move to the firing line." Torres' eyes swept the workshop, taking in the subtle tension that lingered in the air. He'd noticed Webb's pattern of targeting Helen Carter over the past several months, always stopping just short of behavior that would require official intervention. It was the kind of sophisticated bullying that experienced NCOs had perfected, cruel enough to be effective, but careful enough to avoid formal consequences. Helen had moved on to the trigger mechanism inspection, her fingers working with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. She disassembled the fire control group methodically, laying out each component in the exact order it would be reassembled. Her handling of the trigger spring and disconnector showed a level of familiarity that suggested extensive experience with weapon systems far beyond basic maintenance. "Carter," Webb called out again, unwilling to let the harassment drop. "Hope you're not installing any special modifications that might help our enemies. Wouldn't want another Carter family tradition of compromising operational security." The reference to Helen's deceased husband hit like a physical blow. Master Sergeant David Carter had died in military prison 3 years earlier, convicted of passing classified information to foreign agents. The case had been sensational within military circles. A decorated soldier with multiple combat deployments, married to his high school sweetheart, suddenly exposed as a traitor who had sold intelligence for money. The conviction had destroyed not only David's reputation, but had cast suspicion on anyone associated with him, including his widow. Helen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she continued her work without responding. Her finger discipline remained perfect as she inspected the trigger mechanism, checking for wear patterns, proper spring tension, and smooth operation. The inspection was thorough and professional, following technical manuals to the letter. Chief Torres stepped closer to Helen's workbench, ostensibly to review her progress, but actually positioning himself to intervene if Webb's harassment escalated further. "How's the trigger group looking, Carter?" he asked, his tone neutral but supportive. "Within specifications, Chief," Helen replied, her voice steady. "Spring tension is correct, no excessive wear on contact surfaces. Trigger brake is clean at 4.5 pounds. Ready for test firing." Her technical vocabulary was precise, using the exact terminology found in Army technical manuals. Torres nodded approvingly. Over the past 3 years, Helen Carter's work had been consistently excellent. Her maintenance reports were thorough, her safety record was spotless, and weapons she prepared never failed during qualification courses. If anything, her performance exceeded that of many military personnel with formal training. "Outstanding," Torres said, loud enough for the entire workshop to hear. "Carter, when you finish that weapon, I want you to handle the scope mounting for the designated marksman rifles. We need precision work on those." The assignment was significant. Designated marksman rifles required extremely precise scope mounting, with tolerances measured in fractions of inches. The weapons were used by specialized soldiers who needed to engage targets at extended ranges with high accuracy. It was technical work typically reserved for the most skilled armorers. Staff Sergeant Webb's expression darkened. "Chief, maybe someone with actual military training should handle the precision weapons. We can't afford mistakes when soldiers' lives are on the line." Torres turned to face Webb directly, his voice carrying the edge of authority. "Sergeant Webb, Carter's track record speaks for itself. 0 weapons failures, 0 safety incidents, and consistently excellent performance reviews. Unless you have specific technical concerns about her work, I suggest you focus on your own responsibilities." The rebuke was delivered in professional language, but the message was clear. Torres was not going to tolerate further harassment of his personnel, regardless of their civilian status or personal history. The workshop fell silent as other personnel recognized the shift in dynamics. Webb's face flushed with anger, but he was experienced enough to recognize when a senior warrant officer was drawing a line. He muttered something under his breath and moved to the far side of the workshop, but his resentment was obvious to everyone present. Helen finished reassembling the trigger mechanism and conducted a function check, pulling the trigger while ensuring the weapon was pointed in a safe direction. The trigger broke cleanly, the reset was crisp, and the safety engaged and disengaged smoothly. Her testing was thorough and methodical, following every step of the technical procedures. "Rifle number 8 complete and ready for final inspection," she announced, placing the weapon in the completed rack. Her movements were efficient and purposeful, never wasted motion or unnecessary delays. Torres approached Helen's workstation and conducted his own inspection of the completed weapon. He checked the trigger mechanism, verified the torque specifications on critical bolts, and examined the overall condition of the rifle. Everything was perfect, better than perfect actually. The weapon looked like it had been prepared by someone with years of specialized training. "Excellent work, Carter," Torres said, making a note on his inspection sheet. "Move on to the designated marksman rifles when you're ready." Helen nodded and walked to the secured cabinet where the designated marksman rifles were stored. These weapons were different from standard infantry rifles: longer barrels for improved accuracy, adjustable stocks for proper fit, and mounting systems for high-powered scopes. They required specialized knowledge and extreme precision in maintenance and preparation. As Helen unlocked the secure cabinet, her movements betrayed a familiarity with specialized weapons that went beyond basic training. She handled the designated marksman rifle with the easy confidence of someone who had extensive experience with precision shooting systems. Her finger automatically found the safety, checked the chamber, and verified the weapon was clear before beginning her inspection. The rifle was a modified M14 platform, rebuilt for designated marksman use with a precision barrel, adjustable trigger, and specialized scope mounting system. Helen examined the weapon with a systematic approach that suggested extensive knowledge of precision shooting systems. She checked the barrel crown for damage, examined the trigger group for wear, and tested the adjustable stock mechanism. Staff Sergeant Webb watched from across the workshop, his expression growing more hostile as he observed Helen's obvious competence with specialized weapons. In his mind, her skill was further evidence of suspicious behavior. How did a civilian contractor develop such extensive knowledge of military weapons systems? Why was she so comfortable with precision rifles that most soldiers never even saw, let alone worked on? Helen began the scope mounting process, selecting a high-powered telescopic sight from the specialized equipment locker. The scope was military specification, built to withstand harsh conditions while maintaining zero calibration under extreme stress. Mounting it properly required precise measurements, careful alignment, and specialized tools. She placed the rifle in a precision vise that held it perfectly stable while she worked. The scope rings had to be positioned exactly to achieve proper eye relief and optimal scope height. Helen used a specialized measuring tool to ensure the rings were perfectly aligned, checking and rechecking measurements before making any permanent attachments. Her technique was flawless. She applied thread-locking compound to the mounting screws, torqued them to exact specifications, and used a leveling system to ensure the scope was perfectly aligned with the rifle's bore. The process took nearly 45 minutes, but every step was performed with meticulous attention to detail. Webb couldn't contain his suspicion any longer. "Chief Torres, don't you think it's strange how comfortable Carter is with sniper weapons? Most civilians wouldn't even know how to properly mount a scope, let alone handle specialized military equipment." Torres looked up from his paperwork, his expression neutral but alert. Webb's question touched on a concern that had occurred to him as well. Helen's technical skills were exceptional, even by military standards. Her familiarity with weapon systems and procedures suggested training far beyond what a typical civilian contractor would possess. "Carter received comprehensive training before being certified for this position," Torres replied carefully. "All civilian contractors working with weapon systems must pass extensive background checks and demonstrate technical competency." It was true, but it didn't fully explain Helen's level of expertise. Torres had seen military armorers with years of experience who couldn't match her precision and efficiency. Her knowledge of weapon systems seemed intuitive, automatic, like muscle memory developed over years of intensive training. Helen completed the scope mounting and conducted a preliminary bore sighting procedure. She used a specialized tool that allowed her to look through the rifle's barrel while simultaneously adjusting the scope to align with the bore axis. The process required steady hands and precise adjustments, skills that typically took months to develop. "Initial bore sight complete," Helen announced, "ready for range verification when time permits." Torres examined her work, checking the scope mounting with his own measuring tools. The alignment was perfect, the torque specifications were correct, and the overall installation was textbook quality. He made notes on his inspection sheet, rating the work as exceeding standards. "Outstanding work, Carter," Torres said. "That's precision installation quality. Take 15 minutes for coffee, then start on the next rifle." Helen nodded and stepped away from her workstation. She walked to the small break area in the corner of the workshop, where a coffee pot and vending machine provided basic refreshments for the staff. Her movements were controlled and purposeful, never hurried or careless. As she poured coffee into a paper cup, Helen was acutely aware of the conversations happening around her. 3 years of working at Fort Bragg had taught her to listen without appearing to eavesdrop. to gather information while maintaining the appearance of a simple civilian contractor. "I don't care what Torres says," Webb was telling another soldier, in a voice just loud enough for Helen to hear. "There's something not right about her. Nobody gets that good with weapons without serious training, and her husband was a traitor. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree." The other soldier, a young corporal named Jackson, looked uncomfortable with the conversation. "Sergeant, maybe we should focus on the work. She seems to know what she's doing, and Chief Torres trusts her." Webb's expression hardened. "Jackson, you're too naive. Carter's husband sold secrets to our enemies, got soldiers killed, and died in prison for treason. Now his widow shows up here with suspicious weapons skills and unlimited access to our weapons systems. Connect the dots." Helen sipped her coffee and pretended to read a technical manual while listening to the exchange. Webb's paranoia was becoming more pronounced, and his influence over younger soldiers was concerning. He was building a narrative that painted her as a security threat, using her husband's conviction as evidence of her own guilt by association. The truth was far more complicated than anyone at Fort Bragg realized. Helen Carter wasn't just a civilian contractor with unusual skills. She wasn't even Helen Carter, technically speaking. Her real name was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, and she was a counterintelligence specialist who had spent the last 3 years conducting one of the most complex undercover operations in military history. The operation had begun 4 years earlier, when intelligence analysts discovered evidence that David Carter might have been framed at 2200 hours. Someone with high-level access had orchestrated his conviction. Helen Carter collapsed onto the cover their own illegal her frail body hitting hard. The real traitor was still everywhere, still in position to cause damage, and still unknown to military cut on her forehead. Sarah Mitchell had volunteered for the undercover assignment, her, assuming the identity of David Carter's widow and infiltrating Fort Bragg. Marines are trying to eat, and you're making a mess. It had required extensive preparation. 5 other Marines learning civilian contractor procedures, Derek Chen developing a believable backstory, and suppressing Maria her own military bearing and training to appear like an ordinary civilian. Kicked Helen's ribs for 3 years. She had endured harassment, time to retire, Grandma, and isolation. This mess hall doesn't need trash like one of the most challenging investigations of her career. Every day brought new risks of discovery. At 58 years old, her shoulders seemed too thin, new opportunities to gather intelligence about the real conspiracy from her forehead, destroyed David Carter's life. Helen finished her coffee and returned to her gray eyes that seemed to next designated marksman rifle was waiting for her right hand trembled slightly, and she began the familiar process of precision measurement. 5 fingers twitched in an odd rhythm. Her movements remained controlled in a song only she could hear, giving no hint of the complex thoughts running through her mind. Her gaze Staff Sergeant Webb continued his surveillance from across the workshop, 3 exits, noting every detail of Helen's work with growing suspicion. 17 minutes. In his paranoid worldview, what did you just say? Her competence was evidence of deception. Closer. Her professionalism was suspicious. Bending down to pick up the presence at Fort Bragg was a threat to national security. Old people say strange things. What Webb didn't realize was that his hostility toward Helen was actually providing cover. Then for her real darkness swallowed the mess. His harassment made her appear absolute blackness. An ice voice emerged, deflecting attention from her true purpose. A man's voice. Heavy. The cruel irony was that Webb's cruelty was inadvertently protecting the very I've been waiting 28 years that would eventually expose the real traitor seemed to pulse with sudden tension. Chief Torres continued his morning inspections. The small LED light casting wild shadows and reviewing Helen's the progress of various pushing it down with surprising force. His experienced eye caught details that for the first time supervisors carried no tremor at all. The quality of 7 Marines and 1 old cleaning lady, the efficiency of work procedures, and the overall professionalism of his personnel. Perfect when Torres reached Helen's workstation, Jake tried to take charge, shouting orders to his fellow Marines, but panic had already set in. Textbook perfect. Derek Chen frantically tried his radio. It was intuitive and efficient. His phone showed no signal. Maria Santos screamed as footsteps anticipated problems before the sound bouncing off walls, selected tools without hesitation, and made adjustments with the precision of someone who had performed similar tasks she moved with fluid precision. Carter, not bumping into a single table or chair. Where did you learn precision, scope, controlled? She began counting under her usually requires specialized military training. The words were soft. Helen paused in her work, in what sounded like Russian carefully. Boot patterns. Her cover story was well rehearsed, size 11, and documented. Weight distribution suggests constant reinforcement to remain spacing believable. Indicates Spetsnaz. My husband taught me the basics before his deployment. She 3 operators, primary. I practiced on civilian rifles. Secondary, moving connected to something he loved. Third, maintaining. It was a plausible explanation that fit with her cover identity as a grieving widow. Jake's voice cracked with fear. Seeking connection to her deceased husband's interests. Instead, she grabbed Jake's shoulder and guided the story more believable strength toward and discouraged further questioning about structural pillars killer here.
details.
Stay low.
Torres
Don't
nodded,
move.
accepting the
voice
explanation,
laughed, a
but
cold
filing
sound
away
that
his
seemed to come from
observations for
everywhere
future
at once.
consideration.
Hiding won't
Helen
help,
Carter was
Phantom.
clearly more
I know
skilled
every
than her
corner of
background
this place,
suggested,
but
there
months
could
of
be legitimate
preparation,
explanations
every
for her
camera
expertise.
angle memorized.
Military
Every
spouses
patrol
often
route
develop technical
calculated,
skills through
even
informal
scheduled your
training
precious
with their
janitor
deployed
shifts.
partners.
Helen
Something shifted
completed
in
the
Helen's
second scope
posture.
mounting
3 months.
and conducted another
She'd noticed the
bore-sighting
unusual
procedure.
maintenance crew 3
Her
months
movements
ago.
remained
The ones
precise
who worked
and
only at
methodical,
night,
following
avoided
established
eye contact,
procedures,
who
while
moved with too
incorporating
much
proficiency
precision for civilian
improvements
contractors.
that spoke of extensive
The main
experience.
doors burst open.
The completed
Colonel
installation
Richards entered
was
with 2
flawless,
MPs,
flashlights
flashlights
sweeping.
and exceeding
What's
military
going on here?
specifications.
Why are the lights? Second rifle
The
complete
takedown
and
was
ready
swift,
for range
professional.
verification.
Richards
Helen
hit the
announced,
ground
placing
hard,
the weapon in the
unconscious
completed
before he
rack
could
next
finish
to the
the
first
sentence.
designated
The
marksman
MPs
rifle.
followed seconds
Torres
later.
examined her work
Helen
with
moved in the
increasing
darkness,
respect
tearing
for her
secrets
technical
from the hem of
abilities.
her janitor uniform.
Both rifles were
with
perfectly
practiced efficiency.
prepared.
She
with
knelt
scope
beside
installations
Richards,
that
her
exceeded
hands
the
finding
quality
his
of
pulse
work,
in the dark,
typically
applying
performed
pressure
by
to
military
points that were
armorers.
slow bleeding from
Helen
where his
Carter
head
was
struck
clearly
the floor.
wasted in a
How do
basic
you know
maintenance
medical
position,
procedures?
but
Jake
her
whispered.
civilian status
Lucky
limited
guess.
advancement
Helen replied,
opportunities
but her
within the
hands moved
military
with the
system.
muscle memory
The
of
morning
someone
routine
who had done this
continued,
hundreds
with Helen
of times
moving on to
before.
standard
The sound
M4
of breach
carbines
charges
that
being
required
placed on
basic
doors
maintenance and
echoed through the
preparation
hall
for qualification
Small metallic
courses.
clicks that Helen
The work was
identified
routine
immediately.
compared to precision
Semtex,
rifle
Eastern Bloc
preparation,
variety.
but Helen approached it with the
4.3
same
second delay
methodical
once
professionalism.
If this
that
injustice
characterized
makes your
all
blood
her
boil,
tasks.
if you believe
As
those
she
who
worked,
serve in shadows
Helen remained
deserve
alert to
recognition,
conversations
hit that
and
like button
activities
and
throughout the
subscribe.
workshop.
Her
Don't forget to
counterintelligence
tap the
training
thanks
had
button
taught her
below
to gather
to
information
support more
constantly,
incredible true
listening for
stories of
details that
hidden
might
heroes.
advance her investigation.
Outside,
into David
Captain
Carter's
Torres arrived
framing.
with a full squad.
Every piece of
but the doors
gossip,
wouldn't budge.
every casual
They had been
comment,
sealed from inside
every
with
observation
industrial
of personnel
grade magnetic
behavior
locks.
was
Through the
potentially
reinforced
valuable
windows,
intelligence.
Torres could see only
Staff
darkness
Sergeant
and the
Webb's
occasional
hostility
sweep of
was
a
actually
tactical
providing
flashlight.
unexpected
Get me a breaching
benefits for
team,
her mission.
Torres barked into
His harassment
radio,
created
and
natural
someone find out why the
opportunities for
backup
supportive
power isn't
personnel
kicking in.
to share information
Inside,
with her.
Helen guided
Viewing
the 7
her as an
Marines through
underdog
darkness
worthy
with
of
uncanny
protection.
precision.
People who might
Her hand
otherwise
found
be
the
cautious
electrical
about
panel on the
discussing
wall
base
from
activities
pure memory.
were more willing to
Fingers
confide in
tracing
someone they
circuits she
perceived
shouldn't
as
know
vulnerable
existed.
and
Kitchen
isolated.
freight elevator.
The radio
she
crackled
whispered.
with range
Old
control
model
updates.
still runs
As
on
warning
analog
activities
backup
continued
power.
across Fort
Kozlov
Bragg.
wouldn't have thought to
Range
disable
control
it.
to all
Kozlov,
stations. Jake asked.
weapons qualification
You know who this
course will
is?
commence at
Helen didn't
0800
answer.
hours.
She was already moving.
All personnel
leading them
report
through the
designated
darkness.
firing
Jake
positions
stumbled over
with
a chair.
assigned weapons
Helen's arm
and
shot
ammunition.
out,
Catching him
Helen
with one
glanced at
hand.
the clock on the
grip
workshop
was surprisingly
wall.
strong.
07:45 hours.
Maria Santos
In
whimpered as they
15 minutes,
moved, but
the
Helen's
morning's
presence
presence
seemed to transition to
a
actual
strange
weapons
authority radiating
qualification
from the old
where the
woman,
rifles
even
she
in
had
pitch
prepared
darkness.
would be tested
Running
under
to the
live fire
kitchen,
conditions.
Kozlov's voice
It was
taunted.
always a moment of
I
professional
disabled
pride
that
when
exit
weapons
first,
performed
Phantom,
flawlessly
just like I
during
disabled the
qualification
loading
courses.
dock. And the
Chief
emergency
Torres
exits.
began organizing
no one
the
gets
completed
in,
weapons
no one
for
gets
transport
out.
to the firing
Not until
range.
our business
Each
is
rifle had been
concluded.
inspected,
In the
tested,
darkness,
and
Helen
certified
smiled.
ready for use.
It was the expression
The
no one
paperwork
could
was
see,
complete,
but somehow
safety checks
everyone
were
felt
documented,
The
and
temperature
ammunition
seemed to drop
allocations
several
were
degrees.
verified.
I'm not
Everything
running,
was
Victor,
proceeding
she
according
said,
to the standard
her voice
procedures.
carrying across
All
the
right,
hall
people,
with perfect
Torres
acoustic
announced.
calculation.
Time to move
I'm
to the
hunting.
range. Grab your assigned
The
weapons
silence that
and
followed
follow
was
safety
profound.
protocols for transport.
Kozlov had stopped
no
talking,
horseplay,
stopped moving.
no shortcuts,
For the first time
and
since
no
the lights went out,
exceptions to
uncertainty
established
crept
procedures.
into the equation.
Helen secured
Helen
her
tapped something
workstation
against
and
the water
prepared to
pipe.
accompany the
3
group
short
to the firing
3 long,
range.
3 short.
As a civilian
Then a
contractor,
complex
she
pattern
wasn't
that Jake
required to
recognized as
participate in
Morse code but couldn't
qualification courses.
decipher.
But she often
Throughout the
observed
base
to
and her
ensure her
secure
maintenance
monitoring
work met
station, a
performance
young
standards
intelligence
under
officer's
actual
eyes
firing
widened
conditions.
as the message
The
came
walk to the
through.
firing range
Ghost
took
protocol
5 minutes
active,
across well-maintained
authentication,
paths that
Amber
connected
Star,
various facilities
3
at
hostile
Fort Bragg.
operators.
The morning
priority
air was crisp
alpha.
and clear.
The intelligence
with visibility
officer's
excellent
hands
for
shook
precision
as he
shooting.
picked up a red
Weather
phone
conditions
that
were
hadn't been
optimal
used
for
in
weapons
15
qualification.
years.
With
Sir,
minimal
we
wind
have
and
a
good
ghost
lighting.
protocol
The firing
activation.
range itself
Authentication
was a
checks
sophisticated
out.
facility.
It's
designed to accommodate
Sir,
various
it's
weapon
Phantom
systems
6.
and training
Back
scenarios.
in the mess hall,
Derek Chen
concrete
whispered
firing
urgently,
positions were
"That's
separated by
impossible.
protective
How
barriers.
can you know where they
with
With target systems
we can't see
positioned at
anything.
measured distances from
Helen's
25
response
yards
was to remove
to
her
600
janitor
yards.
yards. In the
Electronic
darkness,
scoring
the sound of
systems
fabric
provided
tearing was
immediate
followed
feedback
by
on
the
shot
sharp
placement
thud
and
and
accuracy.
accuracy.
Floor.
Range
When
safety
Jake's phone
officers
light
were
flickered on
already
for
in
just a
position,
second,
conducting
conducting
final
final
inspection
inspection
of
of
the
the targets and
a
safety
wig.
equipment.
Underneath,
red warning
Helen's
lights
real
indicated
hair was
that
shorter,
the range was
darker,
still cold,
pulled back in a
meaning no
severe
live
style that
ammunition was
spoke
permitted
military
forward of the
precision.
safety line.
Two coming from
the range
left,
would remain
Helen
cold
said
until all
calmly.
personnel
One
were
from the
properly
right,
positioned.
the left pair
and
will
safety
use
procedures were
flashbangs.
completed.
Cover your
Helen
ears
took a
and
position
close
in the
your eyes
observation
in
area,
3,
where she could monitor the performance of weapons. The explosion of light and sound was overwhelming, active firing. Helen had already positioned her vantage point provided excellent visibility of the entire range, ears protected, and allowed her to assess the brief moment of illumination. They saw her clearly. Colonel Morrison appeared at the observation. The elderly stoop was gone. The trembling hands elevated platform. The frail grandmother had been replaced by something else entirely. She moved like liquid shadow. His presence was unusual. Handle in her hand. Base commanders rarely observed a precise strike against the wall edge, unless there were special perfectly weighted batons or important visitors. The first operator Morrison stood with his arms goggles, glowing, scanning the range with what appeared to be Helen struck with surgical precision, but Helen noted his head or body where armor protected, but at slightly elevated shoulders and his exposed glances at his watch. The operator dropped silently. You're starting to notice something unusual. These were stress indicators that suggested Morrison was more concerned about the qualification. Comment below if you're catching the routine observation. Maria Santos felt the operator's safety officer's voice echoed across the facility. Helen's hand stopped her immediately. Don't. Range control to all personnel. It's a trap weapon. Prepare for hot range conditions. And the magazine explodes. All weapons will be loaded with live ammunition on my command. Maria gasped. Maintain muzzle discipline and she was already moving, dragging the unconscious operator. Helen watched as the soldiers took their assigned firing that shouldn't exist. Each carrying a rifle that had been prepared during the second operator tried to flank them. The weapons gleamed with fresh oil. She positioned everyone specifically ready to funnel the attacker into a narrow corridor between qualification standards. When he appeared, she was already there. Staff Sergeant Webb positioned himself silently around the entire group, carrying one of the encounter lasted less than 2 seconds that Helen had prepared. The operator went down. His expression was determined, clearly intent on demonstrating superior marksmanship by strike contrast with any civilian's theoretical knowledge of weapon systems. Outside, Chief Torres Sergeant Mills had arrived with reinforcements, conducting final. He was a 20-year veteran who'd served in Bosnia, all personnel understood the qualification course. As he watched through the window, his experienced eye checked weapon orientation, sporadic flashlight safety selector positions, nagged at his memory, and overall readiness for live fire exercises. He muttered to Captain Torres. The range is now hot. I've seen it before. Announced. Bosnia, load weapons with one magazine. There were rumors about a ghost ammunition, night reconnaissance specialists who could operate in complete darkness. Commence firing on my unit commander was the familiar sounds of weapons being loaded filled the range. What's impossible? Magazines being inserted, Phantom bolts being charged, but that whole unit died in Operation Amber Star. All 6 operators. Helen watched the process with professional interest. Noting the smooth operation of weapons growing audible. Enough games. From his position on the observation deck, them all, Colonel Morrison's attention seemed focused on Helen rather than the soldiers preparing to fire. Helen guided the Marines lingered on her with an hand trailing along the wall, more than casual interest in a civilian. She stopped suddenly, presence at the range. Morrison reached for a ruptured the main device. 4 minutes quietly concentration reaches a combustible radio or phone. He's trying to blow us up. His conversation was brief but animated, pitched higher with gestures that suggested he was providing creating a secondary threat requesting information about someone standard Spetsnaz tactic. Helen noticed Morrison's page 47 of their urban focus on the weapons qualification, if memory serves. Her cover required her to appear interested primarily in the technical performance of equipment. Right now, I'm rather than personnel dynamics or command activities. The walk-in freezer is reinforced and airtight. The range safety officer wait out the gas there. The range erupted with the controlled chaos of multiple weapons earlier firing replaced with desperate confusion. Brass casings ejected from rifles but carried clattered on concrete. Gunpowder smoke began to accumulate in the morning air. If I wanted you, the sharp crack of rifle fire echoed across Fort Bragg. Security footage from the performance of each weapon was being reviewed frantically, noting the smooth cycling, consistent ejection patterns, meeting with a man outside the mess hall. Properly maintained. The image was grainy, but the man designated marksman rifles performed exceptionally well. Documents with tight shot groups that demonstrated the value of precision scope mounting. Helen Carter, careful preparation. She died in 2010. Staff Sergeant Webb's rifle car accident flawlessly. Whoever this is, she's using a stolen identity. Work was performing without any echo through the mess hall again. His shooting was competent but not exceptional. They're starting to figure it out, aren't they? Acceptable parameters. Your handler sold you out. Told us exactly where to find you. Continued his observation. How much did Moscow pay you to disappear all those years ago? But his attention remained focused on your country rather than the qualification course. His behavior was becoming increasingly obvious, and military curious glances from other personnel that could run for 7 days commander's unusual interest glowed softly in the darkness. She checked counterintelligence training, had taught her to recognize surveillance patterns 8 meters and forward. Unusual attention from authority figures. Mind the overturned table behavior was definitely outside. They moved through the darkness like a strange suggesting parade. That something had triggered his interest in her activity while 7 Marines stumbled behind during a ceasefire entirely while targets were evaluated. Helen, the third operator, had been waiting to his communication device again. He studied the layout, was longer knew they'd have to pass through this choke point. with
But
Morrison
Helen knew
occasionally
too.
gesturing in
She'd
her
felt
direction
the air displacement
while
from his
maintaining what he
breathing,
thought was
heard
the
the
subtle
discreet
shift of weight
observation.
on the floorboards.
Something
that
was
indicated
developing
someone
that could threaten
maintaining
her
a
cover
firing
or
position
compromise
for extended
her mission.
periods.
Helen began
kitchen
mentally
knife left her
reviewing her
hand in a fluid
preparations for
motion,
potential exposure,
sailing through the
considering
darkness with
evacuation
impossible
procedures,
precision.
and
It
evidence
struck
protection
exactly where she
protocols that
intended,
might become
pinning the
necessary if her
operator's sleeve to the
investigation
wooden
was
door
discovered.
frame.
The
Immobilizing
qualification
his
course
trigger
continued
hand
with
without
soldiers
causing
advancing
serious
to
injury.
longer range
Warning
targets
shot,
that required
she
greater
said simply,
precision
and
the
skill.
next one won't
The weapons
miss.
Helen had prepared
The walk-in
continued
freezer
to
door
perform
opened with a
flawlessly,
pneumatic hiss,
validating
Helen
her
ushered
maintenance
everyone
procedures
inside
and
and paused
technical
at the threshold.
expertise.
Thermal
But the
differential
technical
will
success
hide
of
our
her
heat
work
signatures
was
for
becoming secondary
approximately
to the
6
growing
minutes.
tension
After
surrounding
that,
Morrison's
his
intense
infrared will
interest
pick
in
us
her
up.
presence.
Then what?
Something had triggered
Maria
his
asked,
suspicion
her
or
earlier
recognition,
cruelty replaced
and the
with raw
implications
fear.
could be catastrophic.
Then we stop
for her
hiding
undercover
and
mission.
start hunting.
Helen maintained
Jake
her
watched her in the
professional
dim
demeanor
emergency
while
lighting of
internally
the freezer.
preparing for the
The
possibility
way she stood,
that 3
the way
years
she
of careful
moved,
investigation
everything had
might be
changed.
about to unravel.
The grandmother
Whatever had
facade
caught
had
Morrison's
completely fallen
attention
away.
was serious enough to
You're
warrant
not really a
immediate
janitor, are
communication
you?
with unknown
Helen
parties.
turned to him, and his
in the
behavior
cold light,
suggested that
he
her
could see
cover
her eyes
identity
clearly
might
for
be
the first time.
compromised.
They
The
were the
radio in
eyes of
Morrison's
someone who
hand
had seen
crackled
too
with an
much,
incoming
done
transmission
too much,
that was loud enough
lost
for
too
Helen to
much.
hear fragments
I've been
of
a
the
janitor for
conversation.
15 years,
The
Mr.
words she
Morrison
caught made her
Before
blood run
that,
cold.
ballistic
Before that,
signature
I was
analysis
something else.
and
a Morrison
database match
she repeated his
probability.
name slowly.
Morrison's
Your
face
grandmother's
went
maiden
pale
name
as he
was
listened
Morrison,
to the
wasn't it?
transmission, his
Sarah
eyes
Morrison
widening
from
with what
Oklahoma?
appeared to be
Jake
recognition
nodded,
and growing
confused.
panic.
How did
He
you know
stepped
that?
back from the
Your
observation
grandfather,
deck railing,
Staff
nearly
Sergeant
stumbling
Timothy
in his haste
Morrison,
to distance
served
himself
with
from the
distinction
range
in the
activities
75th
below.
Rangers before
Helen realized
transferring
with
to a
crystalline
classified
clarity
unit in
that something in her
93.
performance
Helen's voice
or
grew distant.
behavior had
He was a
triggered a
good
database
man,
search
the
that
best
was
spotter I
revealing
ever
more
worked with.
information than her cover
You knew my
identity could
grandfather?
withstand.
Knew him?
Morrison's reaction
Helen's
suggested
laugh
that
was bitter.
her real identity
He saved
as
my
Lieutenant
life
Colonel
Colonel
Sarah
times in
Mitchell
Bosnia.
was about
I
to be
managed to return the
exposed,
favor
along with her
twice.
3-year
We called it
undercover
even.
investigation.
The freezer
The
door
morning
suddenly
sun climbed
buckled
higher
as
over
something
Fort
heavy
Bragg,
slammed against
casting
it from
longer
outside.
shadows across the
Kozlov's
firing
voice
range
was
as
closer
the weapons
now, more
qualification
personal.
course
You
continued.
killed 12
Helen
of my
Carter
men in
maintained
Bosnia,
her position
Phantom.
in the observation
Good men,
area, but her
patriots who
awareness was
believed
now
in
split
something
between
greater.
monitoring the technical
Patriots,
performance of
Helen's
weapons
voice
she
turned
had
to
prepared,
ice.
and
They
tracking
were
Colonel
trafficking
Morrison's
children, Victor,
increasingly
7 to 12
behavior
years
on the
old,
elevated platform.
sold to the highest bidder.
Morrison
Your
paced the length of the
patriots were
observation
monsters.
deck. His
They
radio
were soldiers
pressed close
following
to his
orders.
ears as he
They
carried
were
on what
predators,
appeared to be
and
an
I put them
urgent
down like the
conversation.
rabid dogs
His
they
body
were.
language had shifted
Outside
from
the freezer,
casual
the gas
observation
concentration
to
was
obvious
rising.
distress.
Through the small
With
window,
rapid gestures
Helen could see
and frequent
Kozlov
glances
himself
toward
now.
Helen's
Victor
position
Kozlov,
that were no longer
former
subtle or
Spetsnaz,
discreet.
current mercenary,
The irony of the
and the
situation
ghost from her
wasn't
past.
lost on Helen.
She'd hoped never
For
to face
3
again.
years, she had
He was
carefully
older too,
maintained her
scarred,
cover as a
but
grieving
still
widow,
lethal.
seeking meaningful
Tell me,
work
Phantom,
related to her
Kozlov called
deceased
out.
husband's
Do
military
they know about the
service.
massacre?
She had
Do
endured
they know what you
harassment,
did to that
suspicion,
village?
and isolation
Helen's jaw
while
tightened.
methodically gathering
That wasn't a
evidence about the
village.
conspiracy
It was a
that had
processing
destroyed
center.
David Carter's
43
life and
traffickers.
reputation.
0
Now,
civilians.
when she was
The
finally
records say
closing in on
otherwise.
definitive proof
The
of
records were
Morrison's
altered
guilt,
by people who
her own
profited from the
exceptional
trade.
performance
People
was
in
threatening
both
to
our
expose
governments
her
who
true
needed
identity.
the truth buried along
The very
with my
skills
team.
that made her an
Derek
effective
Chin was
undercover
typing
operative
frantically on
were
his
creating
phone,
patterns
which had
that
suddenly
military
regained
databases
signal.
could analyze.
I'm finding
and
something.
potentially match
Classified
to her
files
real
are being
service
accessed
record.
remotely.
Helen's mind
Someone
raced
with
through the
Pentagon clearance
possibilities.
is pulling
Modern
everything
military
about
databases
Operation
contained
Amber Star.
extensive information
On his
about
screen,
personnel
fragments of
performance,
documents
training
appeared,
records, and
photos from
specialized
1995.
skills. If
Six
Morrison had
operators in
requested
night
an
combat
analysis
gear,
of her technical
faces
abilities
obscured
by
by
tactical
behavioral
patterns,
patterns,
but one figure
sophisticated
stood out.
algorithms
Smaller,
might identify
slighter,
correlations
positioned
with
at the
military
center,
personnel,
the team leader,
who possessed
the images
similar
were labeled
capabilities.
Ghost Team
The challenge
6,
was that
Operation
Lieutenant Colonel
Amber Star,
Sarah Mitchell's
status
service record
KIA,
included extensive
killed in
counterintelligence
Derek
training,
read.
advanced
All 6
marksmanship
operators confirmed
qualifications,
dead,
and
bodies were
specialized
covered
technical
and
schools
identified.
that would create
He looked
exactly
up
the
at Helen,
kind of capability
but you're
profile
here.
that Helen
5
Carter
bodies
was
were
inadvertently
recovered,
demonstrating
Helen corrected,
through her work
5
performance.
members of my team.
Staff Sergeant
The
Webb
6th body
completed his
they claimed
firing
was
sequence
mine
and
belonged
moved
to
to
one
the
of the weapon clearing area, where range safety officers verified that rifles were unloaded test was faked by someone very high personnel could leave their firing to disappear. Why? His M4 carbine had performed flawlessly because I refused certain orders. Because that heroes clearly frustrated his desire to find committees. With Helen's the gas leak had been contained by Webb approached the observation area where Helen was standing. Through the freezer window, they could see him setting up something with renewed suspicion. Helen recognized it immediately. He said, "A portable his voice carrying enough volume, military grade, nearby could cut through the freezer door. I have to admit, your rifle maintenance was adequate. Now, but I still think there's something suspicious about your He's got us trapped." Helen turned to face steadily, maintaining your grandfather once professionalism that characterized her behavior. We were pinned down by 32 hostiles in a bombed-out school. Thank you for the feedback, Sergeant Webb. No backup. I'm glad the rifle performed to your satisfaction during qualification. What did you do? I
Her
told him the
response was
truth.
deliberately
When you
measured,
can't run,
non-confrontational.
There's only one
designed
option
to
left.
avoid escalating
She paused,
tensions,
checking
while
her watch
demonstrating
again.
the kind of respectful
You become the
deference
nightmare
that
they
was
whisper
expected
about
from
in the
civilian
dark.
contractors
She moved to the back
interacting
of the
with
freezer,
military
running her
personnel.
hands along the wall
But Webb
until she
wasn't
found what she was
satisfied
looking
with
for,
professional
a
courtesy.
maintenance panel painted
Where
over,
exactly did you
forgotten.
learn precision
Inside
shooting
was the
techniques?
freezer's original
Webb
ventilation
pressed.
system.
Your
From
scope
before
mounting
the
renovation
renovation
better than
5
most
years
military
ago.
armorers.
The ductwork
and that
was
kind
narrow,
of skill doesn't
cramped,
develop
but
from
possible
casual
hobby shooting.
This leads to the loading
The question
dock,
was pointed
she
and
said.
specific.
It's a straight
designed
crawl
to probe
30
for
meters.
inconsistencies.
At the
in
end,
Helen's
there's a
cover
drop
story.
into the storage room.
Webb had clearly
2
been
meters,
observing her
controlled
work with
fall.
increasing suspicion.
You want us to crawl through
and his
there?
interrogation
Maria
was
looked
becoming
horrified.
more focused.
I want
and
you to
potentially
survive.
dangerous.
This
to
is
her
how you
mission.
survive.
Helen considered
One by
her
one, she
response
helped them
carefully.
into the vent.
Her cover
giving
story
each
needed to
precise
remain
instructions on
consistent with
navigation.
previous explanations.
Jake was the
while
last to
providing
go.
sufficient
As he
detail
climbed in, he
to
turned
satisfy
back.
Webb's
What about
curiosity
you?
without
I'll be
revealing
right behind
information
you.
that
Helen
could
lied
compromise
smoothly.
her real identity.
Jake hesitated.
My husband was
That's
very
not true,
passionate
is
about
it?
precision shooting.
Helen smiled.
Helen
and
replied.
for a moment,
her
she
voice
looked like
carrying a
grandmother
subtle note
again.
of sadness that
Your
reinforced
grandfather
her
was
cover
smarter than
identity
you.
as a grieving
He
widow.
would have already been halfway
He spent
through
his
that
leave
vent
time
by
teaching
now.
me technical procedures.
He would have stayed
because
to
he
help
said
you.
it helped him stay
No.
sharp between deployments.
He would have followed orders.
After he
Because
died,
he understood
I
that
continued
sometimes,
practicing
because
one
it made me
person
feel
has to hold the
connected to his
line
memory,
so others can
the
live.
explanation was
Go
emotionally
now.
plausible and
That's an
consistent
order,
with her
Marine.
established background.
Jake crawled into the vent.
Military
and Helen
spouses
sealed
often
it behind
developed
him.
technical
Then she turned to
hobbies
face the
as a way
freezer
to
door,
maintain
just as the
connection
thermal
with
lamp
deployed
burst
partners.
through.
And
The metal
continuing
glowed
such
orange,
activities
then
after
white,
losing a
then
spouse
began
was
to
a common
calm like
coping
curtains.
mechanism.
Through the
Webb's
growing
expression
gap, she could
suggested
see
he wasn't
Kozlov's face,
entirely
scarred and
convinced,
older,
but the emotional
still
carrying
carrying
of
the
Helen's
same
cruel
cruel
intelligence
intelligence she
further
remembered.
aggressive questioning.
Alone at last,
socially
Phantom,
uncomfortable.
he said in Russian.
Attacking a widow's
Not quite,
attempt to honor
Helen
her
replied in
deceased
the same
husband's
language.
memory,
You
could be
forgot
seen
about
as
the ghosts.
unnecessarily
Ghosts?
cruel. Even
The
one
ones who have
person
been
watching
watching
you
for
for
the
the
last
last
3
suspicions
months
about Helen's
Did you really
background.
think you were the
Chief
only
Torres
one
approached
planning
the
this
group,
reunion?
carrying his clipboard
Doubt flickered
and wearing the
across Kozlov's
satisfied
face.
expression of a
Helen
supervisor
used that
whose
moment of
equipment had
uncertainty.
performed
The freezer had
flawlessly
one
during
feature
demanding
Kozlov
tests.
hadn't considered.
Outstanding performance
Emergency
across the board,
CO2
he
fire
announced.
suppression.
Zero weapon
She triggered it
malfunctions,
manually,
excellent
flooding the
accuracy
area with
scores,
dense white
and no
gas that
safety
obscured
incidents.
everything.
That's
In
exactly
that
what
chaos,
professional
she
maintenance
moved.
produces.
Mills, watching
Torres's
from outside,
praise was
saw
directed
it
toward
happen
all
through
the
the
maintenance
window.
personnel. One moment,
But his eyes
there was
lingered on
only
Helen
white
with
gas and
obvious
confusion.
approval.
Her
The
work
next,
had consistently
Kozlov
exceeded
was on the
standards,
ground,
and
Helen
the weapons
standing over
qualification
him.
results
His own
validated
weapon in
his
his
decision
decision
to assign
Pentagon's
her to
on the
precision
line,
weapons maintenance,
Torres
despite
shouted.
Webb's
They're
objections.
asking about Phantom
Carter,
6.
Torres
They want
continued.
confirmation
Your
of
scope
identity.
mounting on the designated
Tell them
marksman rifles
Mills started,
was exceptional.
then stopped.
Both weapons achieved
Through the
superior
window,
accuracy
in a brief
scores
clearing
that
of the
exceeded
gas,
qualification
he saw Helen's
requirements.
torn shirt.
Whatever training you
Saw
received
what was
was
underneath.
clearly comprehensive and
Mother of
effective.
God.
Tell
The
them
public
confirmed.
recognition of Helen's
Phantom
technical
6's
excellence
alive
was professionally
The tattoo
gratifying,
was elaborate,
but
beautifully
strategically
dangerous.
terrible.
Every
It covered
compliment
most
and
of her left
acknowledgement of
shoulder
her
and upper
skills
back.
added to the pattern
Ghost
of
Recon
exceptional
in
performance
Gothic letters
that could
curved
trigger
above a
more
detailed
sophisticated
skull, wearing a
analysis of her
special
background
operations
and
beret.
capabilities.
Below it,
Morrison's radio
Operation Amber
conversation
Star
ended abruptly,
and
Helen
coordinates.
noticed him moving rapidly toward the stairwell that
44.8176
connected
degrees
the
north,
observation deck to the range floor.
15.8678
His movements were
degrees
urgent
east.
and purposeful,
The exact
suggesting that whatever
location in
information
Bosnia
he had
where
received
5 members of
required
Ghost Team
immediate
6
action.
had died.
Helen's
Three Purple
counterintelligence
Hearts were
training
etched into the
activated
design,
threat
along with a
assessment
silver
protocols
star
as she
and
evaluated
distinguished
Morrison's
Morrison's
approach.
approach.
But it
His
was the
body
number
language
that indicated
indicated blood
high
run
stress
cold,
and
a
potential
simple
aggression,
six,
incorporated into the skull's
focused
design,
attention,
not
that
sixth
suggested
member,
he was
not
operating
Team
under
6.
significant
She was
pressure
six.
to
The
resolve
legendary
an
commander
immediate
of the
problem.
most elite
Morrison
night
reached the
operations
range
unit
floor
in U.S.
and approached the
military
group of personnel
history
gathered around
Jake
Helen
and the others had
and
made
Chief
it through the
Torres.
vent and
His
were
arrival
stumbling out of the
created
storage
an
room
immediate
when they
shift in
heard the
group
commotion.
dynamics.
Emergency
With everyone
lights were
unconsciously
flickering back
straightening
on
their
throughout the
postures,
base,
and a
the
adopting
backup
more
power had
formal
finally
bearing
been
in response
restored,
to the base
probably
commander's
by
presence.
Helen's ghost protocol
Chief Torres,
activation.
Morrison
They
said,
ran back towards
his
the
voice
mess hall,
carrying an
arriving
undertone
just
of
as the
tension
doors
that
were being
was obvious
forced
to
open
anyone
by
with
base
experience
security.
reading military
Inside,
authority figures. They could see Helen standing calmly in the center of the chaos. Regarding Kozlov was on his knees. The request was phrased as routine business. His two conscious operators were suggested urgency that went beyond the third was still unconscious but breathing
His
steadily.
eyes remained fixed on
Colonel
Helen
Richards
with an
was sitting
intensity
up,
that
holding
confirmed
his
her
head,
suspicion
but alert.
that her cover
He took
identity
one
was
look at
facing
Helen,
serious
saw the
compromise.
tattoo through her
Torres
torn
looked
shirt,
confused by
and
the
struggled
unusual
to his feet.
request. Even injured,
Sir,
even
is there a
confused,
specific
military
issue with Ms.
protocol
Carter's
took
work
over.
performance?
He snapped
Her
to
maintenance
attention
records are
and
excellent.
saluted. And
Colonel
today's
Richards'
qualification
Camp Pendleton
results
security
validate the
he said
quality of her
formally.
technical work.
It's an honor, ma'am.
Morrison's
An
jaw
absolute honor.
tightened slightly at
Helen
Torres's
didn't return the
defensive
salute.
response.
She couldn't.
This isn't about
She wasn't
her
in
work
uniform,
performance,
Chief.
She wasn't officially
There are some
military
background
anymore,
verification issues
but she
that
nodded
need
with
to
the
be
gravity
addressed
of someone who
immediately.
understood the
Ms.
weight
Carter,
of the gesture.
please accompany me
The
to my
honor was
office.
mine, Colonel. Helen's mind
15
raced
years
through her
ago,
options
I
as
swore I was
Morrison's
done with
request
this life.
created a
But
crisis
some
point
oaths
for
run
her
deeper
undercover
than
mission.
retirement.
Refusing
Jake
to comply
pushed
with
through
the direct
direct
orders
order
that
from
was
the base
forming.
commander
His face
would be
was streaked
suspicious
with tears
and potentially
Ma'am,
dangerous.
But
What I did
Morrison
earlier
to a private location
I didn't know
could expose her to interrogation.
I'm so sorry.
Or worse, if he had discovered
Helen
her
looked
real
at him
identity
with those gray eyes
Of
that had
course,
seen too
Colonel.
much.
Helen replied.
You couldn't have
her
known.
voice steady.
I made
despite
sure
the
of that.
adrenaline beginning
I've
to
been
flow
Helen
through her
Carter,
system.
janitor for
Should I collect
15
my
years.
equipment and secure
Before
my
that,
workstation?
I was Lieutenant
first?
Colonel Helen Morrison.
The question served multiple
commander of
purposes.
Ghost Team 6.
It demonstrated
And
normal
before
concern
that,
for proper procedures.
she paused.
Created a
Before
brief
that,
delay that might
I was
provide
just a young
strategic
woman who
options
believed she
and
could
allowed
make a
her to
difference in
access
the
her
dark
toolkit
places
where
of the
certain
world.
emergency items were
Morrison,
concealed among
Jake's voice
legitimate
cracked.
maintenance equipment.
That's
Morrison's impatience
you have the
was
same
becoming
name as
more
my
obvious with
grandfather.
each passing second.
No, son.
Your equipment
Your
will be
grandfather
secured
took
by
his
base
wife's name
personnel.
when they married.
This matter
Said
requires
Morrison was a
immediate
name worth
attention.
carrying forward.
Helen nodded and
He
stepped
was
away
honoring
from her
his promise
workstation,
to me,
but as she moved,
to make
her
sure the
hand
Morrison
brushed against
name
her
lived
toolkit
on
in
after
what
I was
appeared to be
supposedly
an
dead.
unconscious gesture.
Maria
In reality,
Santos stood
she was
frozen.
activating
Her
a
earlier
concealed
cruelty
recording
transformed
device that
into
would
awe.
document whatever
The
stories
stories
about
about women
women
in special
occur.
operations.
The device was
They
sophisticated
started
military
with you.
counterintelligence
You were the
equipment
first.
designed to
Not the
appear
first,
as ordinary
Helen
maintenance
corrected.
supplies.
Just the first
while
they
providing
couldn't classify out of
high-quality audio
existence.
recording
My
capability.
team's work in Bosnia
If Morrison
saved
planned to
300 children
threaten
from
or
trafficking
interrogate her,
rings.
the military
would be
wanted to bury it
documented
because
as
it
evidence of
implicated
his
several
guilt and her
high-ranking
innocence.
officials in the trade.
Staff Sergeant Webb
They gave me a
watched the
choice:
interaction with
die a
obvious
hero
satisfaction,
or live as
clearly
nobody.
believing that his
So
suspicions
you chose
about
to
Helen
disappear?
Carter were finally
I chose
being
to
validated
survive
by command
and to
attention.
keep my promise to
I
five
knew there
good
was something
soldiers
wrong with
who
her,
didn't make it
he
home.
muttered to another
I told their
soldier,
families
loud
I'd
enough
live
for
for
Helen
all
to hear.
6 of us. Morrison
Derek
began
Chen was
walking
still on
toward
his
the
phone,
administration
pulling up
building,
more
with Helen
declassified
following at the
documents.
prescribed distance.
This is
for a
incredible.
civilian
You
accompanying
have the
a senior
highest
officer.
confirmed kill count
His
in
pace
night
was rapid and
operations history,
purposeful,
indicating
73
urgency
confirmed
that
in Bosnia
reinforced
alone
Helen's assessment
Helen's
that a
expression
significant
darkened.
crisis was developing.
Every one of them was
As they
trying
walked
to hurt
across the
children.
base,
Helen's
Helen's
awareness
celebrate those
expanded
numbers,
to
Mr.
include
Chen.
potential
I
escape
carry
routes,
them. Captain Torres
communication
stepped forward.
opportunities,
Ma'am,
and
I
resources
need to
that
ask,
might
is
become
the threat
necessary
contained?
if her cover
Helen
was
looked at
blown
Kozlov,
and her
who
safety
was glaring
threatened.
at her with
3 years of
undimmed hatred.
undercover work
This
had
threat
taught her
is,
to always maintain
but Victor
multiple
here was just
contingency
the
plans.
first wave.
The
He
administration
mentioned
building
Moscow
housed
paid
the
someone.
offices of senior
There's a larger
command
operation
personnel,
in play.
including Morrison's
Hydra,
suite on the second
Kozlov
floor.
spat suddenly.
The building was
You think
heavily
you've won,
secured with
Phantom?
multiple checkpoints
Hydra has
and surveillance
47
systems
assets
that would make
embedded in
any
military
unauthorized
bases
departure
across the country.
extremely difficult.
This was just to confirm
Morrison led
you were
Helen through the
alive,
main entrance
to draw
and
you
past
out.
the security checkpoint,
Then you
where
failed,
military
Helen
police
said simply.
personnel noted
I'm
their
not the same
passage,
operative
but
I
didn't
was 28
interfere with
years
what
ago.
appeared to be
I'm just an
routine
old
business
woman who
between the
cleans
base
floors.
commander and a
Kozlov
civilian
laughed
contractor.
bitterly. You just took
Helen's
down
civilian
3 Spetsnaz
identification
trained
badge
operators
provided
in complete
appropriate
darkness.
access credentials
I got
for
lucky.
administrative areas.
Lucky?
The
Mills
elevator
had entered
ride
the
to the
mess hall
second
now,
floor,
his
was
eyes
conducted
wide with
in tense
recognition
silence,
and respect.
with Morrison
Ma'am,
avoiding
what
eye
you did
contact,
tonight,
while
that
Helen
wasn't luck.
maintained the
That was
appearance
Ghost
of
Team
cooperative
training,
compliance.
the acoustic targeting,
The confined
pressure
space
point
created
strikes,
an
the predictive
opportunity for
movement
Helen
patterns.
to observe
I
Morrison's
studied your
stress
tactics in
indicators more
intelligence
closely.
school. More
Elevated
Marines were flooding
breathing,
in now.
Slight tremor
Word had
in his
spread across
hands,
the base faster
and
than
perspiration
wildfire.
that suggested
Phantom
extreme
6 was
anxiety.
alive. The legend
Morrison's
was real,
office was
and
larger
she'd been
and more
cleaning their
formal
mess
than
hall
typical
for
military
15
spaces.
years. With
Helen looked
awards,
uncomfortable with the
photographs,
attention
and
She
military
moved toward the door,
memorabilia
but
that
stopped
proclaimed
when
his
she heard the
successful
distinctive
career
sound of
and command
helicopters
authority.
approaching.
A
Not
large
just any
desk
helicopters,
dominated the room,
the twin
positioned
rotor
to
beat of
create psychological
CH-47
advantage
Chinooks,
during meetings
military
with subordinates
transport,
or visitors.
flying in formation.
Please have a seat,
Torres's
Miss Carter,
radio crackled
Morrison
to life.
said,
Captain,
gesturing
this
toward
is
a chair
Tower.
positioned
We have
directly
4
in front of
inbound
his desk.
helicopters
The
requesting
seating arrangement
immediate
was designed
landing.
to create a power
Authorization
dynamic
code
that favored
is
the person
the
behind
controller
the desk.
paused, his
A
voice
common
shaking.
interrogation
Sir,
technique used
it's
to
a Joint
establish
Chiefs
psychological
authorization.
control.
4 stars.
Helen sat down and
4
maintained
of them.
alert but relaxed posture.
Through the mess hall
projecting
windows,
cooperation
everyone watched
while
as the
remaining
helicopters
prepared for
descended
rapid
onto the
response
parade
if the
ground.
situation became
Even at a
threatening.
distance, the
Her
stars on the
counterintelligence
aircraft
training
were visible.
included extensive
These weren't just any
preparation for
generals.
exactly this
These
type
were
of
the highest
confrontation.
ranking officers
Morrison
in their
moved
respective
behind
branches.
his desk, but remained
Helen
standing,
closed her eyes.
using his height
They
and
said if
position
Ghost
to create
Protocol was
additional
ever activated,
psychological
they'd
pressure.
come.
His
I didn't
hands
think
rested
they'd
on the
remember
desktop,
after all these years.
and Helen could see that
General
his
Robert
knuckles were
Anderson,
white with
Army
tension.
Chief of Staff.
Carter,
General
Morrison
Patricia
began,
Thompson,
his voice
Marine
carefully
Corps
controlled,
Commandant,
but carrying concerning
Admiral
undertones
James
of barely
Hayes,
contained
Chief of
anxiety.
Naval Operations.
I've received
General
some
Michael
concerning
Mitchell,
information about
Air
your
Force Chief of
background and
Staff.
qualifications that
They
requires
walked in
immediate
formation across the
clarification.
parade ground.
Helen
Their
tilted
aides
her head
struggling
slightly,
to keep pace.
projecting mild
Every
confusion
Marine on
and
the base
concern
had stopped
that would be
what they were
appropriate
doing
for
to
an innocent
watch.
civilian contractor.
Jake looked at
facing
Helen in
unexpected
amazement.
administrative
4
scrutiny.
service chiefs
I'm not sure
for
I
one
understand,
person?
Colonel.
Helen's voice
Is there
was
an
quiet.
issue with my security
Ghost Team
clearance
6 didn't
or
officially
work
exist,
performance? But we ran
Morrison's eyes
operations for
narrowed
all
as he
branches.
studied Helen's
We
expression,
were the solution
searching
when
for
conventional
signs of
forces
deception
couldn't
or
operate,
recognition
when the
that
mission
might
was too
confirm his
dark,
suspicions.
too dangerous.
The issue
or
is that
too
your
politically
technical skills
sensitive
and
for
knowledge
acknowledged
just say this
units.
knowledge appear to
to exceed
The
what
generals
would be
entered the mess
expected
hall.
from
The
someone
room
with your
fell
documented
silent.
background
Every Marine
and
snapped
training.
to attention.
The
generals
accusation was
moved past
direct,
them all,
but still
heading
vague
straight
enough
for
to
Helen.
allow Helen
She stood
multiple
still,
response
not at
options.
attention.
She
Morrison
wasn't
was
military
probing
anymore,
to see how she would
but
react
with a
to
bearing that
suggestions
commanded
that
her cover
respect
story
nonetheless.
might be
General
inadequate
Anderson
or
spoke first.
incomplete.
Hello, Six.
Colonel, Helen
General,
replied, maintaining
we thought
her
you were
tone
dead.
of respectful confusion.
That was the
I've
idea,
always been
sir.
very thorough in my
Why
approach
activate
to
the
technical
protocol
work.
now?
My
After
husband
15
taught me to take
years,
precision
Helen
seriously,
gestured to Kozlov.
and I've continued
He
learning
found
through
me,
practice
which
and
means
study.
others can too.
Is there a specific
And he
concern
mentioned
about my
Hydra.
qualifications?
If that network is real,
Morrison
if
reached
there
for
are
a
truly
folder on his
47
desk
embedded
and
assets,
opened it
then
to
the country
reveal what
needs to
appeared
know.
to be print
General
outs of
Thompson
database
stepped forward.
queries and
She was the
analysis
first female
reports.
Marine Corps commandant.
The documents were
In her
positioned
eyes
so
held a
Helen
mixture
couldn't
of
read them
respect
clearly,
and something
but their
deeper.
official appearance
You could have
suggested
stayed
that
hidden.
significant
Could have let him
resources
complete
had
his
been
mission.
devoted to
He
investigating
would have killed
her
7
background.
Marines and stolen classified
Miss
defense
Carter,
specifications,
Morrison said,
ma'am. His voice
hiding
taking
stopped
on
being
a
an
more
option the
aggressive
moment
tone.
he entered this
Ballistics
space.
analysis of
Admiral
your
Hayes
scope
cleared
mounting
his
work
throat.
shows
The president has
precision
been
levels
briefed
that
He's
typically
authorized
require
full
years of
reinstatement if you
specialized
want it.
military
Your
training.
previous rank,
Your
back
technical
pay for
knowledge and
15
procedural
years,
familiarity
full honors.
exceed what civilian
Helen shook her
contractors
head.
normally
I'm
possess.
done with killing, Admiral.
Helen felt
I've
her
been done
pulse
since
quicken
Bosnia.
as Morrison's
Then what do you
investigation
want?
appeared
General
to be
Mitchell
more
asked.
sophisticated
Helen
than
looked
she
at
had
Jake,
anticipated.
at Maria,
Modern
at
military
Derek,
databases
at all the young
contained
Marines
enormous
who had
amounts
witnessed
of
something
information
extraordinary
about personnel
tonight.
training.
These kids need
performance
training,
metrics,
real training,
and technical
not just how to fight in
capabilities that could
daylight with
potentially be
million-dollar
cross-referenced,
equipment,
but
to
how to
identify
operate when
correlations
everything goes
between her
dark.
demonstrated
When
abilities
technology
and
fails,
military service
when they're
records.
outnumbered and outgunned.
Colonel, Helen
You
responded,
want to teach?
I take my work
I want to
very
make sure that the
seriously,
next time someone
because
like
I understand
Kozlov
that
comes
soldiers'
calling,
lives
there's
depend
more than
on
one old
properly
janitor who can
maintained
stop
equipment.
them.
If
The
my
general's
attention to
exchanged
detail
glances.
has raised
Anderson
concerns,
nodded slowly.
I'm happy to provide
The Ghost
additional
Protocol
documentation
Academy.
of my training.
We've had
and
the plans
background.
drawn up for 20
Morrison
years,
leaned forward
waiting
across
for the
his
right
desk.
person to
His
run it.
eyes locked on
I have
Helen's
conditions,
face,
as he
Helen
delivered
said.
what was
Name
clearly
them.
intended as a
First,
decisive
it's
probe.
open to all branches.
The problem, Ms.
Second,
Carter, is that
women
your
get equal
performance
consideration
patterns
for
match
selection.
those of military
Third,
personnel.
we focus
with
on
advanced
protective
counterintelligence
operations,
training,
saving
and
lives,
specialized
not taking
operations
them.
backgrounds.
Fourth,
she looked
the
at Jake.
accusation hung in the
I
air
get to
like
choose
smoke
my
from a
first
discharged
candidates.
weapon.
Jake's
Morrison
eyes
had
widened.
essentially accused
After
her of
everything
being
he'd
an
done,
undercover
after the
military
way he
operative,
treated her,
which was
she was
dangerously
choosing
close to
him.
the truth.
Helen saw his
Helen's
confusion.
response would need to
Your
be carefully
grandfather would never
calibrated
forgive me
to
if
deflect
I didn't give you
suspicion
the
without
chance to
creating
be better than
additional
you were
inconsistencies
tonight.
in her cover story.
Besides,
She
Colonel
smiled
Morrison,
slightly,
Helen said,
you have
allowing
his
a
eyes.
note of indignation
He could
to
see in
enter her
complete
voice.
darkness too.
I find
Once
your
taught him
implications
how.
extremely
General
offensive.
Anderson extended his
I'm
hand.
a widow who lost
Welcome
her
back,
husband
Colonel
to false
Morrison.
accusations of
Helen looked at
treason,
his hand for a long
and now you're
moment,
suggesting
then
that I'm
shook
some
it.
kind of spy
It's still
or
Carter.
infiltrator.
Helen Carter.
That's both hurtful
The colonel
and
died in
completely
Bosnia
unfounded.
with the team.
The emotional
janitor
response
survived
was
to teach their
strategically
lessons.
calculated to put
Then
Morrison
welcome
on the
back, Ms.
defensive,
Carter.
while
Maria
reinforcing
Santos
her
stepped
cover
forward
identity
tentatively.
as David
Ma'am,
Carter's grieving
could I-
widow.
Would you
Attacking a
consider
widow's
me for the
loyalty and
academy?
integrity would be
Helen
seen as
studied her.
inappropriate
The young
behavior,
woman who had kicked her
even for
while
a
she
base
was down,
commander
who had
conducting
called
a
her
legitimate
trash.
security
Why?
investigation.
Because tonight
Morrison's
I learned that
expression
real strength
showed
isn't about
uncertainty
size
as
or
Helen's
intimidation.
emotional response
It's
forced
about
him to
protecting
consider the
others even when they
possibility
don't deserve
that his
it.
suspicions
You
might be
protected us
wrong.
after we
Military
Her
officers
voice
were
broke.
trained to be
after
cautious
we were horrible
about
to
making
you.
accusations without
Everyone
solid
deserves
evidence,
a second chance,
particularly
Santos.
when dealing
Even
with
bullies
civilians
who kick
who
old
had
women.
suffered personal
Derek
tragedies.
Chen raised his
Miss
hand.
Carter,
I
Morrison
want in
said,
too.
his tone
I want to
slightly
learn
more
how you did what you
conciliatory.
did. I'm
The
not
acoustic
making
targeting,
accusations.
the movement prediction.
I'm simply trying
It's
to
like you
understand
turn
how
darkness
someone
into
with
an
your
advantage.
background develops
Helen
such
nodded
advanced
slowly.
technical capabilities.
Darkness is only
Helen
frightening
sees
if
the
you don't
opportunity
understand
to
it.
go on the offensive.
Once you
while
learn its
maintaining
language,
her emotional
it becomes your
appeal.
greatest ally.
Colonel, my husband
Kozlov
died in
suddenly
prison,
spoke up,
believing that his
his
own
voice bitter.
military had abandoned
You're making
him
a
based on
mistake.
false evidence.
Hydra won't stop.
Now you're questioning
They know
my
you're
loyalty
alive
and
now.
suggesting that
They'll
I might
come
be
for
some
you,
kind of
for
threat to
all of
national
you.
security.
Don't
Helen
you
walked
think
over
the
to
Carter
him,
family
knelt
has suffered
down
enough?
so they were eye level.
The reference to David
Let them
Carter's
come.
case was strategically
I've been hiding
brilliant
for 15
because
years,
it forced
Victor.
Morrison
I'm
to confront
tired
the
of hiding.
foundation of his
She
own
leaned
guilt.
closer. officer, speaking
If Morrison
in Russian.
was indeed
Tell
the
your
real
handlers
traitor
that
who would
Phantom
frame
6 is
David
dead,
Carter,
but
then
Helen's
Helen's
emotional
emotional
very
appeal
much
would
alive,
create significant
and she's going to
psychological
train an
pressure.
entire generation
Morrison's
of
reaction
ghosts.
was immediate and
Kozlov's
telling.
face paled.
His face went
You're
pale,
going to
and
create
his
an
hands
army
gripped
of
the edge of his
operators like
desk with
yourself?
obvious tension.
No.
The
I'm
mention
going
of
to
David
create
Carter's
something better.
case had clearly struck a
Protectors who
nerve that went
operate in
beyond
darkness but
professional
serve the
concern
light.
about security
She
issues.
stood, switching back
Ms.
to
Carter,
English.
Morrison
Your war
said,
is over, Victor.
his voice now
You lost the
noticeably
moment
strained.
you walked into my mess
The
hall.
David Carter case was
The generals
thoroughly
were already
investigated
making plans,
and resolved
speaking
according
rapidly
to
into
proper
secure
procedures.
phones. The
There's no
academy would
reason
be
to revisit
fast-tracked.
those issues.
Resources would be
Helen
allocated.
noticed the defensive
but
tone
Helen
in
wasn't
Morrison's
listening.
response.
She was looking
and
around the
decided
mess
to
hall,
increase the
her
pressure.
mess hall,
Colonel,
where she'd
resolved
spent 15
is an
years in
interesting
humble
word
service.
choice.
maintaining
My husband
her cover,
maintained his innocence
keeping her
until
skills
the day
sharp
he
by
died.
observing everyone
He believed
who came
someone
through.
else was responsible
Jake approached
for the security
hesitantly.
breaches he
Ms.
was
Carter,
blamed for.
Helen,
I need
Morrison
to tell you
stood up
something.
abruptly
Speak
and walked
freely,
to the window.
Morrison.
His back
My
to Helen
grandfather,
as he struggled to
before he
control
died,
his visible
he used to
distress.
tell me stories.
The mention of
about
David
a warrior
Carter's
who
continued
moved like
claims of
smoke,
innocence was
who could
clearly
fight in
creating
complete
significant
darkness,
psychological
who saved his
pressure
life
for
in
the
Bosnia.
real perpetrator
Jake's
of the
voice
crimes.
trembled. He said she was
Carter,
the bravest person he
said
ever
without
knew,
turning
but he
around.
also said she was the
Conspiracy
saddest,
theories and
because she carried
unsupported
the weight of
allegations
everyone she couldn't
don't change
save.
the facts
Helen's
of a case
composure
that was
finally
properly
cracked slightly.
adjudicated
A
by
single tear
military
ran down her
justice.
cheek.
Helen
Tim always
recognized
saw too
that
much.
Morrison's
He
defensive
left me
reactions
something,
were providing
told me to give
valuable
it to her if I
intelligence
ever
about
found
his
her.
involvement in
I
David
thought he was
Carter's
talking about a
framing.
myth.
His
a legend.
extreme discomfort
I
with
never
discussion
imagined
of the case
Jake
suggested
pulled out a
personal
small
knowledge
wooden
that
box
went
from his
beyond
pocket.
what would be
He
expected
carried
from
this
a
for
base
20
commander
years.
with only
Said it
administrative
belonged to someone
awareness
who
of the
sacrificed
situation.
everything
The
for
recording
others.
device concealed
Helen
in
opened
Helen's
the box
toolkit
with trembling
was
fingers.
documenting the entire
Inside was a
conversation,
challenge coin,
capturing
worn smooth
Morrison's
by years
defensive
of handling.
responses
On
and
one
emotional
side, the
reactions
ghost
that
team
would provide
six
important
insignia.
evidence
On the
of his
other,
guilt.
6 names.
Every defensive
The 5
statement
who
and
died,
nervous reaction
and
was
hers.
being
He had
preserved
this made
as
after
proof
the
of his
memorial
involvement in the
service,
conspiracy.
Jake explained.
Morrison
Said the
turned
sixth
back
ghost
to
was
face
still
Helen,
out there,
his
still
expression
watching
showing
over
signs of
people,
internal
still
struggle
protecting
as he
those who
wrestled
couldn't
with
protect
competing
themselves.
pressures. His
Helen held the
investigation
coin
into
tightly,
Helen's
her
background
eyes closing
had
as
revealed
memories
concerning
flooded
correlations
back.
with military
Your grandfather
training,
was more
but
than
her
my
emotional
spotter,
appeals
Jake.
and references
He was
to
my
David
conscience.
Carter were
When the
creating
darkness got too
psychological
deep,
stress
when
that
I couldn't
threatened
see
his
the difference
composure.
between justice and
Ms.
vengeance
Carter,
anymore,
Morrison
he
said,
pulled me back.
his voice now showing
He said
clear
you saved
signs of
300
strain.
children in Bosnia.
I think this conversation has become more complex than necessary.
But I couldn't save
Perhaps
my
we should
team.
postpone further
They died
discussion
because I made a
until I can
choice.
review additional
Save the
information.
children or save my
Helen
people.
recognized that
I
Morrison
chose
was
the
trying to
children,
end the
and I've
confrontation
lived with that choice
before
for
his emotional
28
reactions
years.
revealed too
General
much
Thompson
information
stepped forward
about his
You made the
involvement
right
in
choice,
David
Helen.
Carter's case.
Those children are
His
adults
nervousness
now.
and defensive
Many of them have
responses
families of
had
their
already
own.
provided
You
valuable
gave them lives your
intelligence,
team would have
but
been
she
proud
needed
to
to
maintain
sacrifice
pressure
to gather
I know,
more definitive
Helen said
evidence.
quietly.
Colonel Morrison,
knowing and
Helen
feeling
said,
are different
rising
things.
from her chair and
The base
fixing
was
him with
fully
direct
alert
eye
now.
contact.
Marines were
I
gathering
hope you
outside
understand
the mess
that
hall,
questions
trying to
about
catch
my
a glimpse of the
loyalty
living
and
legend.
questions about
Someone
my
started a
background
slow
are
clap,
extremely
then another.
serious matters
Soon,
that affect
the
my
entire
livelihood
base
and
was
reputation.
applauding. Not the dramatic
Morrison nodded
celebration
rapidly,
of a sports
clearly
victory,
eager to
but the
end the
deep,
uncomfortable
respectful
conversation.
acknowledgement
Of course,
service
Ms.
beyond
Carter.
measure.
I'm sure we can resolve
uncomfortable
any
with the
administrative
attention.
concerns
She turned to the
through proper
generals.
channels.
If we're doing
Helen
this
moved
academy,
toward the door.
I have
a
one
pause
more
before
condition.
leaving.
Delivering
Name
what she
it,
hoped would be a
Anderson
final
said.
psychological
No publicity,
probe. Colonel,
no media,
I just hope that the
no
military's
glory.
treatment of my
Ghosts
family
don't seek
doesn't
spotlights.
become a pattern of false
Agreed.
accusations.
Helen
and
nodded,
destroyed
then
lives.
looked around the mess hall
Morrison's
one more
reaction
time.
was immediate.
I'll need to
and
train my
dramatic.
replacement.
His
This
face
place won't
flushed,
clean itself.
His hands trembled
Ma'am,
slightly.
Colonel
and his voice
Richards
cracked
spoke
as he
up,
responded,
still holding his head
Ms.
from the
Carter,
earlier takedown.
I can assure you
I think
that
we
this
can
base
manage
operates
professional cleaning
according to
staff.
the highest
Professional
standards
cleaning
of
staff
integrity
don't
and
notice when
justice.
someone's been casing the
The
base
protest
for 3
was too
months,
forceful
Helen
and
pointed
emotional.
out.
For someone with a
Sometimes
clear
the best
conscience,
security
discussing
is the
routine
person everyone
administrative
ignores.
matters.
Morrison's
She walked toward
extreme
the door,
reaction
then
to
paused.
suggestions about
The
false
7 Marines
accusations
who were here tonight
provided
Morrison,
strong evidence of his
Santos,
personal
Chen,
involvement
and
in
the
creating
others.
the very
They're my first
injustices
selection for
Helen
the
was
academy.
describing.
They've already
Helen
had
left
their
Morrison's
first
office with
which
confidence
was
that her mission
General
was
Mitchell
approaching a
asked.
successful
Never judge a
conclusion.
book by its cover.
3 years of
and
careful
always be
investigation
kind to the cleaning
had finally
staff.
produced
She
definitive
smiled
evidence
slightly.
of Morrison's guilt.
You never know when your life
documented
might
by
depend on
sophisticated
it.
recording equipment.
As Helen walked
that
out
would
into the
provide
night, the generals following
his
at a respectful
involvement in
distance,
David Carter's
Jake called
framing.
out,
Ms.
But
Carter!
she also recognized
What happens
that
now?
Morrison's discovery
She turned
of
back,
correlations
and
between
for a
her
moment,
performance
Jake saw
and
not
not
the
the
old
old
janitor,
janitor,
had
not the
created
legendary
significant
operator,
danger for her
but simply a
continued
woman
safety.
who had found
His
purpose
panic
again
and defensive
after years in
reactions
the
suggested
shadows.
that he might take
Now,
desperate
Mr.
measures
Morrison,
to
we
protect
get to
himself.
work.
If
Your
your grandfather
grandfather
used
used
to
to
say
say
that the
was
hardest
actually
battles aren't
Lieutenant
fought with
Colonel
weapons,
Sarah
but
Mitchell,
with wisdom.
conducting a
The academy
counterintelligence
opens in 2
investigation.
weeks.
The next
Don't
phase
be
of her
late.
mission would require
Yes, ma'am.
careful coordination
Helen Helen walked across
with her
the
support
parade
team
ground
to
her
ensure that
stride
Morrison
different
could be
now.
arrested,
Not the
and
shuffle of an old
charged
janitor,
before he had
but not
opportunities
quite
to
the
destroy
predatory
evidence
grace of an
or
elite
threaten her
operator
safety.
either. It was
The
something in
investigation that
between.
had begun 3
The
years
walk of someone
earlier
who had
was
found
finally
balance
ready to
between who
transition
they were
from
and
intelligence
who they
gathering
had to be.
to law
Behind her,
enforcement action.
Kozlov was being
Helen
loaded
walked
into
Thaw
a
through
secure
the
administrative
transport.
building.
He would be
and back
interrogated,
toward the weapons
his Hydra
facility,
network
maintaining
exposed
her
and
normal
dismantled.
routine while
The 47
internally
embedded
preparing for the
assets he had
critical
mentioned
final phase
would be
of her
identified
undercover
and
mission.
neutralized.
Morrison's
But that
panic
was
had
work for
revealed
others
his
now.
guilt.
But
Helen
it had
also
a different
created
mission.
new dangers
General
that would
Anderson
require
walked
immediate
beside her.
attention
You know
from
this
military
changes
justice
everything.
authorities.
Ghost Protocol
Behind
Academy
her,
will
Morrison remained in
revolutionize
his
how
office,
we train special
frantically making
operators.
phone calls and
It's not
accessing
about
computer
creating
systems
super
in
soldiers,
what
General.
appeared to be
It's
a
about
desperate
teaching them
attempt to
that
destroy
the most
evidence
powerful
and protect
weapon
himself
isn't
from the
technology
consequences
or
of his
strength.
crimes.
It's
His
understanding.
panic was confirmation
Understanding
that Helen's
terrain,
investigation
understanding
had been
enemies,
successful,
but most
it also
importantly,
meant that time was running out
understanding
for safely
themselves.
concluding her mission.
And you think these
The
7
morning
Marines
sun
have what it
continued to
takes?
climb over Fort Bragg
Helen glanced
as
back
3 years
the
of
mess
careful
hall where
investigation
Jake and the others
reached
stood
its
watching.
climactic moment.
They faced their
Helen
fear
Carter
tonight.
had maintained
They
her
saw their
cover
assumption
identity through
shattered.
harassment,
They learned
suspicion,
humility
and
That's more than
isolation.
most operators
to gather
learn
the
in
evidence
years of training.
needed to restore
Even
David
the ones who
Carter's
bullied
honor
you,
and bring the
especially
real traitor
them,
to justice.
they've learned the hardest lesson
But
of all.
Colonel Morrison's
that
strength
discovery
without
of her
honor is just
exceptional
violence,
abilities,
and
had
violence
created a
without
dangerous
purpose
crisis
is just
that would
cruelty.
test all her
A
training
secure phone
and
rang.
determination.
Anderson
in the
answered,
final
listened,
hours of her
then
mission.
handed it to Helen.
The ghost of the
It's for
battlefield
you.
was about to emerge
Helen
from
took the
3
phone
years of
reluctantly
hiding to complete the most
Yes,
important operation
Ms.
of her
Carter.
career. The walk
The voice
back
was
to the weapons
familiar,
facility
but older,
felt different,
more
to Helen,
mature.
as she processed the
This is
intelligence
Anna
gathered
Volkov.
from her
You
confrontation.
might not
with
remember me,
Morrison.
but
his extreme reactions
Little
to mentions
Anna,
of David Carter's case
Helen's
had
voice
provided
softened.
confirmation of his guilt, but they had also
From
revealed
Sarajevo
that her own cover was in serious jeopardy.
Not so little
Morrison's
anymore.
investigation into her
I'm
background
37
had
now,
uncovered correlations
married
that
with
could
3
expose her
children of
real
my own.
identity at any moment.
The
Helen
woman's
reached the
voice
weapons
broke
facility
slightly.
and resumed her normal duties.
I saw
but
the
her
news
awareness
bulletin.
was now heightened.
They said
to detect
Phantom
any
6 was
changes in
alive.
personnel behavior or
I had
security
to call.
procedures that
Had
might
to
indicate
thank you.
Morrison was
You
taking
saved my
action
life when
based
I was
on their
9 years
conversation.
old.
You
The
carried
familiar
me out
sounds
of
of
that
military
trafficking
base
center
activity
yourself. continued around
Helen's
her,
eyes closed,
but underneath the
memories
routine
flooding back.
operations,
Anna with
dangerous
the red
currents were
ribbons in
beginning
her
to
hair.
flow. You
Chief
remember,
Torres looked up from
I
his
remember all
paperwork as
3 Helen returned to her
317.
workstation. There was silence.
Everything
on the
all right,
line.
Carter?
Then Anna spoke
You look a
again.
bit tense after your
My
meeting
daughter
with
is
the colonel.
17 now.
Helen
she
forced
wants
a
to be a
casual
Marine.
smile
I've
while
been
internally
terrified
calculating
thinking about
how
how
much
much
information
information she could
But
safely
knowing
share
you're
without
training the next
compromising her
generation,
mission.
I'm
Just some
not
routine
afraid
administrative
anymore.
questions
What's
about
her
my
name?
background verification.
Helena. I
Nothing
named
that
her
affects
after
my
you.
work status.
Helen had to take a
Torres
moment to
nodded,
compose
but his
herself.
experienced eye caught
Send me her
subtle signs
information.
of stress
If
in
she's
Helen's
anything
demeanor
like her mother,
that suggested
she'll make
the
an
meeting had
excellent
been
ghost.
more significant than
After ending the
routine
call,
administration.
Helen handed the phone
After
back to
26
Anderson.
years in the
They
Army,
had reached a
he had
nondescript
developed an
building at the
instinct
edge
for
of the base.
recognizing when
She looked at
personnel
it
were
with
dealing with
surprise.
serious problems.
This is Helen
Your
began
quarters for
organizing
tonight,
her tools
Anderson
and
said,
preparing for
Tomorrow
the
we'll
afternoon
discuss the
maintenance
academy
schedule.
details.
But her movements were more
tonight,
mechanical than
you should
usual.
rest as she
You've
processed
carried
the
this burden
implications
alone
of
for too
Morrison's
long.
investigation.
Helen looked at
If
the
military
building, then back
databases
at the
had
mess hall in the
identified
distance.
correlations between
I should
her
clean up.
performance
The
patterns
morning shift
and
will need
specialized training
Helen,
records,
Thompson
it was
interrupted
possible
gently.
that automated
You're not the
analysis
janitor anymore.
systems were already
No,
flagging her
Helen
identity
agreed.
for further
But
investigation.
I'm not Phantom 6
The radio
either.
on Torres's
That person
desk
died in
crackled
Bosnia with her
base-wide
team.
communications traffic.
She looked at each general
including
in turn.
routine administrative
I'm something new
announcements
now.
and operational
Someone who
updates.
teaches others to
But
walk
Helen
in
noticed
darkness
an
without
increase in
losing their light.
communications involving
General
security
Hayes nodded
personnel
slowly.
and military
What should we call
police
you
that
then?
suggested
Helen
heightened
thought
alert
for a
status
moment.
across Fort
Instructor
Bragg.
Carter will do.
Staff
Just
Sergeant
another
Webb
teacher
approached
at
Helen's
just another
workstation
training
with an
facility.
expression of
There's
barely
nothing just
concealed
another about what
satisfaction.
you're building.
So,
Mitchell
Carter,
said.
how did your
That's the
private
point,
meeting with
General.
the Colonel go?
The most dangerous
Hopefully he's
person in
finally
any
taking
room
security
is the one
concerns
nobody
seriously.
notices.
Helen
I'm going
looked
to
up from
teach
her
them to
tool
be
organization
invisible
with
in
carefully
plain
controlled
sight,
neutrality.
to be protectors
The Colonel
who never
wanted to
need
verify some
recognition,
details
to be
about my
ghosts
background and
who guard
training.
the living.
Nothing that
As
affects
the generals
my duties
departed,
here.
leaving
Webb
Helen
smirked,
alone
suggested
outside her
he believed
temporary
the meeting
quarters.
represented
She looked up at the
validation of his
stars.
suspicions about
The same
Helen's
stars she'd
background and
navigated
loyalty.
by in Bosnia.
I'm
when
sure
her
he's just
GPS
being
failed.
thorough about
The
security
same stars her
protocols.
team had seen
Can't
on
be
their
too
last
careful
night
when dealing
alive.
with people who have
I kept
questionable
my promise,
associations.
she whispered to the night.
The reference to David
I
Carter's
lived.
conviction was
And now I'll
obvious,
make sure
and
others
Webb's
learn what we
satisfaction
knew.
indicated
That
he
sometimes
believed
the greatest
Morrison's
heroes are the ones whose names
would
are
eventually
never
result
known.
in Helen's removal
Inside the
from
quarters,
base.
she found a package
What
waiting
Webb
on
didn't
the table.
realize
No
was that his
return
harassment
address,
had
but she
actually
recognized the
provided
handwriting.
protective cover
She opened it
for
carefully,
Helen's real
revealing
mission
a set of
by
dog
making her
tags,
appear
not
vulnerable
hers,
and
She'd
isolated.
thrown those away years ago.
Helen's
These were
shoulder-mounted
new,
radio
freshly
received
minted.
a priority
Instructor
transmission
Helen
that
Carter,
immediately
they
captured
read.
her attention.
Ghost Protocol
All
Academy.
maintenance personnel
And on the
report
back,
to range
a simple
control for
inscription.
emergency
The
equipment
shadow that
inspection.
guards the light.
Immediate
There was a
compliance
note.
required.
Welcome back to the fight.
The announcement
But
was
this time,
unusual.
you're not
because
alone.
equipment
A
inspections
friend who
were
remembers
typically
Bosnia.
scheduled in advance.
Helen held
rather
the
than
tags
being
for a
called
long
as
moment,
emergency
then put them
procedures.
on.
Helen
For
recognized the
15
possibility
years,
that
she'd
Morrison
hidden from her
might be using
past.
administrative
Now,
procedures
she would
to
use it to
isolate her
forge a
for
better
further
future.
interrogation.
Her phone,
or worse,
the civilian
Chief
one
Torres
she
looked
carried as a
confused by
janitor,
the unexpected
buzzed with a
announcement,
text.
text.
Emergency
It was from
equipment
Jake Morrison.
inspection.
Ms.
I wasn't
Carter,
notified of any
I'm reading my
problems with our
grandfather's
maintenance
journal.
standards or
He wrote about you
procedures.
every day.
Helen gathered
He
her
said you
essential
taught him that
tools and
courage
prepared
isn't
to
the
comply
absence
with
of
the
fear,
directive,
but action
she also
in spite of it.
activated
I
additional
want to learn
recording
that
devices
too.
concealed
She
in her
texted
equipment.
back.
Lesson
If
one
Morrison
starts
starts orchestrating a confrontation,
0500.
she
Bring
wanted
the
to
others.
ensure that evidence of his
What should we
actions would be
prepare?
preserved
Nothing.
regardless of what
The darkness
happened to
will
her
teach you
personally.
everything you need to know.
The movement of personnel
Outside,
toward range control
Camp Pendleton
created
was settling into
opportunities
its
for Helen
nighttime
to observe
routine.
the deployment
Guards
of security
walked their
forces
posts
across Fort
Marines
Bragg.
slept in their barracks.
Military police
And
vehicles
somewhere
were
in a
positioned at
secure
strategic
detention facility,
locations,
Victor
communication
Kozlov was
traffic
beginning to
suggested
understand
that
base
he'd made a
security was operating
catastrophic
under
error.
heightened alert
For those
procedures.
interested in learning
As
real
Helen walked
protective
toward
tactics
range
from
control,
former
she
special
noticed Colonel
operations
Morrison's
instructors
staff car
check out
parked
the
near
online
administrative
defensive
building
strategies
with its
course.
engine running.
This week
The vehicle's
only,
positioning
it's 50%
suggested
off for
that
those
Morrison
ready
was
to step
preparing
out of their
for rapid
comfort zone
departure from
and
the
into
base,
confidence,
possibly indicating
he
that
thought
he was
planning
hunting
to
an old
flee
woman
rather than risk
Instead,
further
he'd
investigation.
awakened something far
Range
more
control was
dangerous,
located in a secure
facility,
and teachers
that managed
unlike
all
soldiers
weapons training
don't just
and
win
qualification
battles, they create
activities at Fort
generations of
Bragg.
winners.
The building
Helen
contained
stood by the
sophisticated
window,
communication
watching the base
equipment
she'd called home
ballistics
for 15
analysis
years.
systems,
Tomorrow,
and secure storage
everything
for
would change.
sensitive training
The
materials.
Ghost Protocol Academy
It was also
would
an
begin its
ideal
work.
location for
7
conducting
Marines
private
who had started the night as
away
bullies
from
would
casual
begin their
observation.
transformation
Helen
into
entered range
protectors.
control,
But
and
tonight,
immediately
she
assessed
had
the
one more
tactical
task.
situation.
She picked
Several
up the
other
secure
maintenance
phone
personnel
Anderson
were
had
present
left,
and
but they
dialed a
appeared
number from
confused
memory.
about the purpose of
It
the
rang
emergency
3 times
inspection.
before a voice
Military
answered in
police
Russian.
personnel
This
were
is control
stationed at
exits.
This is
and their
Phantom
positioning
6,
suggested
Helen
that
said
the
in
facility
perfect
was
Russian.
effectively under
Authentication,
lockdown. A senior warrant
Amber
officer
Star,
Helen didn't recognize
priority message
approached
from
the
Moscow.
assembled maintenance personnel.
Ladies
There
and
was
gentlemen,
stunned
we're
silence.
conducting
Then,
immediate background
Phantom 6 is
verification
dead.
procedures for all
Phantom 6
personnel
is dead,
with access
Helen
to
agreed.
sensitive weapons systems.
But Helen Carter
This
is very
a
much
routine
alive,
security measure,
and she has
but
a
it
message for
requires
your
individual
Hydra
interviews
network.
with each
What
team
message?
member. The
Schools in
explanation was
session,
plausible,
class
but
size,
suspicious,
unlimited,
given the timing.
graduation
Immediately after
rate,
Helen's
100%,
confrontation with Morrison.
course title,
she recognized the
How to Hunt
possibility that
Hydra
Morrison was
Operatives
using
in
legitimate
Total
security
Darkness.
procedures
She
as
paused.
cover for
Oh,
isolating
and
her
Victor
from potential
Kozlov?
allies
He
and
failed.
witnesses.
Spectacularly.
Ms. Carter,
the warrant
she hung up
officer
before they could
continued.
respond.
Please
Let them
report to
worry.
interview room
Let them
3 for
wonder.
your background
Let them
verification
fear what was
session.
coming.
Helen
The
nodded
mess hall
compliance
lights were
while
internally preparing
the space
for
that
what
had been
could be
her
a final
battlefield just
confrontation
hours ago
with
returning
Morrison
to
or
mundane
agents.
normality.
The interview room
But Helen knew
designation
better.
suggested a
Every
formal
mundane
interrogation
space could become a battlefield,
where Morrison could
every
confront her
ordinary
with whatever
person could be
evidence his
extraordinary.
investigation had
Every
produced.
shadow could hide
Interview
a
room
protector.
3 was a small
Jake
windowless
Morrison stood
space
outside
designed
her
for
quarters,
conducting
having run
sensitive
all the way
discussions
from his
without
barracks.
risk of surveillance
Ms.
or
Carter,
interruption.
the
The
room
room
contained
contained
basic
I keep
furniture
thinking about
arranged
what
to
you
create
said about
psychological
darkness
pressure
being
on
on
subjects.
subjects.
With
Helen
recording
opened the
equipment
door.
that could
The
document
young Marine who had shoved her
conversations
for
mocked
official
her,
purposes.
humiliated her.
Helen entered the room
now stood
and
with
was
tears
surprised to
streaming
find it
down his
empty,
face,
except for a
I'm
single
so
chair
sorry,
and a small
he said.
table. But as she
Not
moved
just for
toward the
tonight,
chair, she
for
heard
every
the
veteran
veteran
I've
sound of the
dismissed,
door lock engaging
every person
behind
I've
her,
judged by
confirming
appearance.
that she was now
Every time I
trapped
chose
in what could
cruelty
be
over
a dangerous
kindness.
situation. Apologies
Morrison's
or words
voice
came through a
Morrison.
speaker system
Tomorrow,
built into
you'll
the
begin
room.
making
Ms.
amends through
Carter,
actions.
I
What if I'm not
apologize for
good
the
enough?
deception.
What if I
but
can't
recent
learn what you're
developments
teaching?
have made it
Helen
necessary
studied
to
him.
discuss
So
your situation
young,
more
so
directly.
much like his grandfather
Helen
before
looked around the
Bosnia.
room.
Your
identifying
grandfather asked
the
me the
location
same
of
question
recording
once.
equipment.
Want to
and
know what I told him?
communication systems.
Jake
while
nodded
preparing
eagerly.
her response.
I told him that good enough
Colonel
is the
Morrison,
enemy of great.
if you
That
have
fear of
questions
failure
about
is
my
just another
background
darkness
or
to navigate.
qualifications,
And that the only
I'm
way
happy
to
to
honor the
provide
fallen
any
is to
information
be
better
better
than we
through
were
proper
yesterday.
administrative channels.
Did he become great?
Morrison's laugh
He
carried
became
no
something
humor,
better.
only tension
He became
and growing
reliable.
desperation.
In pitch darkness,
Ms.
under
Carter,
fire, or should I say
outnumbered and
Lieutenant Colonel
outgunned,
Sarah Mitchell,
Tim Morrison never
I think
failed
we're
to
past
watch
the
my
point of
six.
maintaining
That's
your cover
worth more than
story.
greatness.
Helen felt
That's
her
worth
pulse spike
trust.
as Morrison
Jake
revealed
straightened.
knowledge of her
I
real
want to earn
identity.
that.
3 years
trust.
of careful
Then
investigation
be here at
had been
0500.
compromised,
And
but she
Morrison,
needed to assess
yes,
how much
ma'am.
Morrison actually
Bring coffee
knew versus
black,
how much he
the
was
real
guessing
stuff,
based
not
on
that mess
incomplete
hall swamp
information.
water.
If
Colonel
I'm going
Morrison,
to turn you into
Helen
ghosts,
replied,
I need
maintaining
proper
her
civilian
fuel.
persona.
Jake actually
I
smiled.
don't understand what
Yes,
you're
ma'am.
talking about.
0500.
My name is
Real
Helen
coffee.
Carter, and
As
I'm
he
a
ran back
civilian
to the barracks,
contractor.
Helen allowed
If you
herself
have
a small
concerns
smile
about my
too.
identity,
The boy
I
had
suggest you
potential.
contact
They
the
all
appropriate
did.
authorities
Even the
for
ones who had been
verification.
cruel.
Morrison's
Maybe
response
especially
came
them.
immediately.
They'd learned
carrying
humility
the edge
tonight,
of someone who
and that was
believed
the
he held
first
decisive
requirement for
advantages.
wisdom.
Her
Lieutenant
phone rang
Colonel
again.
Mitchell,
The
my
civilian
database
one.
analysis
The caller
confirmed
ID
that
showed
your
technical
unknown,
performance
but she recognized the breathing
matched
pattern
those of a
before the caller
counterintelligence
even spoke.
specialist with advanced
28
training
years
in
and she
covert
still
operations.
recognized it.
Your scope
Hello,
mounting
Dmitri,
precision,
she said
weapons
calmly.
handling procedures,
They
and
say you
surveillance
captured
detection
Victor.
methods
They
are
say you're starting with someone who graduated from the top 5% of advanced military
It's nothing
schools.
personal.
Helen realized
I
that
know.
Morrison's
Helen's
investigation
voice
had
held
been
no
more
fear,
sophisticated
only
than she had
resignation.
anticipated.
But not
Modern
tonight.
military databases
Tonight I'm just a
contained
tired
enormous
old woman
amounts
who
of
needs
performance
sleep.
data that could be
You were never
analyzed
just
to
anything
identify
phantom.
correlations
Dimitri
between
paused.
demonstrated capabilities
How long do I
and
have before
specific
your
training
academy is
programs.
operational?
Colonel,
2
Helen
weeks.
said,
I think
then
you
I'll
are
see you
making
in
connections
13
that don't
days.
exist.
Correlation
forward
isn't
to it.
causation.
She hung up
and
and
civilian
set the phone
training can
aside.
produce
Dmitri
capabilities similar
Volkov,
to military
Anna's uncle,
education.
and the best tracker
Morrison
the Soviet
took on a
Union
more
ever
threatening
produced.
tone. He'd been hunting
Lieutenant
her for
Colonel
3
Mitchell,
decades.
I know
Now
exactly
he
who
finally
you
knew
are
where
and
she
why you're
was.
here. But
You're
Helen wasn't
conducting an
worried about
investigation
Dmitri.
into David
She was
Carter's
thinking about
case,
tomorrow,
and you
about
believe
7
the
Marines
Marines
would
would begin their
conviction.
transformation.
Helen's mind
about
raced
the
as
Ghost
Morrison's
Academy
admission
that would
confirmed
rise
both
from the
his
ashes
knowledge
of
of
her
her identity
identity
and
and his
she looked at the
involvement in
challenge
David
coin
Carter's
Jake had
framing.
given her.
The
Running her
conversation
thumb
was
over
being
the worn
recorded by her
surface.
concealed
6
devices,
names, providing
5
evidence
dead,
that could vindicate
1
both her
presumed
mission
dead,
and David's
Tomorrow,
memory.
she would begin
Colonel
creating
Morrison,
a new generation
Helen
of
said,
names,
deciding
names
to
that would
abandon
never
her
be
cover
known,
and confront
never
him
be
directly.
celebrated, but would
If you
stand
know who
between
I
the
am,
darkness and
then you
those who
understand
couldn't
that I
protect
have the
themselves.
authority and
The
resources
next morning
to
arrived
investigate
with
crimes
typical
against
California
military
Marine
personnel.
fog.
Your reaction to my
500
presence
hours
suggests
exactly.
you have something
Helen
to hide.
stood in the empty
Morrison's
training ground
pause
behind
before
the mess
responding,
hall, a place
indicated
she'd
that
observed
Helen's
for
direct
15
challenge
years,
had
but never
created new
officially
pressure
entered.
for him to
She wore
consider his
simple black
options.
tactical pants
He had
and a
revealed
gray
knowledge of
t-shirt.
her identity,
No rank,
but
no
he had also
insignia,
exposed his own
nothing to
involvement in the
indicate
conspiracy
who or
she was
what she
investigating.
was.
Jake arrived
Lieutenant Colonel
first,
Mitchell,
carrying a
Morrison
thermos of
finally
coffee
said,
that smelled
"Your
like heaven
investigation
compared
threatens
to
to
standard
expose
military
sensitive
brew.
operations
Behind him came
that
Maria
go beyond
Santos,
David Carter's
Derek
ken.
Case.
There are
and the
national
4 other
security
Marines who had been in the mess
implications
hall
that you
they
don't
all looked
understand.
nervous.
Uncertain.
Helen recognized
You came,
Morrison's
Helen
attempt to
said
justify
simply.
his actions
We could
by
not
claiming
come,
higher
Maria
authority
replied,
or classified
not after
missions.
last night.
It was a common
Helen
defense
defense
used by
coffee,
military
took a
personnel
sip,
caught
and
in
nodded
illegal
appreciatively,
activities, suggesting
Colombian,
that their crimes were actually
single origin.
authorized operations.
Your grandfather had
national
good
interests.
taste too, Morrison.
Colonel Morrison,
How do we start?
Helen replied.
Derek asked.
There are no
His
national
technical mind
security
already trying to
justifications
categorize
for
and
framing
organize
innocent
what was about to
soldiers
happen.
or conducting
We
illegal
start with
intelligence
forgetting everything you
operations
think you know
against
about
American
combat,
military
Helen said.
personnel. If you
Line
were
up,
involved in
arms
David Carter's
length apart.
conviction,
They
you
complied
committed
immediately.
crimes that
The
demand
casual
accountability.
arrogance from last night
Morrison's
had been
response
replaced with
revealed
eager
increasing
attention.
desperation.
Close your eyes,
as Helen's
Helen
confrontation
instructed.
forced him
Now,
to
tell
acknowledge
me what
the
you hear.
illegality of his actions.
The ocean, Jake said.
Lieutenant Colonel,
What else?
you don't understand the
Helicopters
complexity
from
of
the
situation.
airfield.
Maria
David
added.
Carter was
Maybe
asking
3
questions
clicks
that
south.
threatened to expose
Good.
operations
What else?
involving foreign intelligence
Footsteps,
cooperation.
Derek said suddenly.
Helen felt a
Someone's
surge of
watching us.
satisfaction.
Multiple
as
someones.
Morrison began providing
Helen
details
smiled
about the
slightly.
conspiracy
Open your
that had
eyes and turn
destroyed
around.
David Carter's life.
Behind them
his
stood
confession
20
was being
Marines,
recorded,
including
and would
Colonel
provide
Rogers,
definitive
Captain
proof
Torres,
of the
and
illegal
Sergeant
activities
Mills.
that her investigation
They've been approaching
had been
for the last
designed
2
to
minutes,
expose.
trying to observe
Colonel
without
Morrison,
being
Helen
noticed.
pressed.
Lesson
Are you
1,
saying that David
Helen
Carter
said,
was framed
you're
to protect
always being
illegal
watched.
intelligence
The
operations?
question is whether you know it or
Morrison's
not.
confession
These
came
Marines
in a
wanted to
rush of
see the
words
legendary
that revealed
Phantom
3
6 in
years of
action.
suppressed
But I'm
guilt
not
and
here to
fear.
put on a show.
David Carter discovered
Morrison,
evidence of
Santos,
unauthorized
Chen,
cooperation.
You're
with
going to
foreign
demonstrate what
intelligence
you learned
services.
last night.
He was going to
We didn't
report
learn anything,
violations of
Jake
operational
protested.
security
We just
and
survived.
intelligence sharing protocols.
Survival is the first
we had
lesson.
to discredit him.
You stayed
before
calm
he could
when the lights
compromise
went out.
ongoing operations.
You followed instructions
Helen
from
had the
someone you
confession she
dismissed
needed,
as
but
worthless
Morrison's
hours
admission
before.
also revealed
You
that he
navigated
was
in
part of a
complete
larger
darkness.
conspiracy.
That's more than
involving
most
multiple
people accomplish in a
personnel
lifetime
and
of
possibly
training.
foreign intelligence
Mills
services.
stepped forward. The implications were
with
far
respect,
more serious.
the base
than a
commander
single
wants to
case
know
of
when the
wrongful
official
conviction.
academy starts.
Colonel,
Helen said.
It started the moment
Who
that
else
these
was
7
involved
decided
in
to show
framing
up,
David Carter,
despite their shame and
You said
fear.
we had to
Helen
discredit
replied.
him.
Which
Everything
suggests
else
you
is just
weren't acting
paperwork.
alone. Over the next
Morrison
2 hours,
realized that
Helen
his
led them
confession
through
had
exercises
exposed
that
more
seemed
information
simple,
than
but
he
were
had
impossibly
intended.
difficult.
Lieutenant
Standing
Colonel Mitchell,
perfectly
this
still for 20
conversation
minutes,
needs to end.
walking heel
You're
to
in
toe
possession
in a
of
straight
classified
line with eyes
information
closed
that threatens
identifying
ongoing
objects by
operations.
sound alone.
Helen heard
counting
sounds of
heartbeats
movement
in a
outside
crowd.
the interview room.
This
that
is
suggested
ridiculous,
Morrison was
one of the
preparing to
watching
take more
Marines
direct
muttered.
action
This
against
isn't
her.
combat
The locked
training.
door and
Helen heard him
isolated
from 30
location
feet away.
meant that she was
You're right,
vulnerable
Corporal
to threats
Hendricks.
or violence.
It's not
If Morrison
combat
became
training.
desperate
It's
enough
survival
to prevent her
training.
from reporting his
Combat
confession.
lasts seconds or
Colonel
minutes.
Morrison, Helen
Survival
said,
lasts
my
a
investigation
lifetime.
has been
Which would you
conducted
rather,
with
master?
full authorization
Hendricks flushed,
from military
not having realized
intelligence
she could
command.
hear him or know
Multiple
his name.
agencies
He'd
are
never
aware of my
introduced
mission,
himself,
and
but
Helen had
expecting
been watching
regular
everyone
reports
on
on my
base for
progress.
15 years.
It was a
She
bluff
knew them
designed
all.
to discourage
By
Morrison from
0700,
taking drastic
word had
action.
spread across the
But Helen
base.
wasn't certain
The training
whether he
ground
would
was
believe that
surrounded
she
by
had
off-duty
sufficient
Marines,
support to
all
protect her
wanting
from
to witness
retaliation.
history.
Desperate
Helen
people
ignored them,
often made
focusing
poor
on her
decisions
7
about
students.
risk assessment
Santos,
and consequences.
she called out.
You kicked
Morrison's
me
voice
last night when I
returned
was
through the
down.
weaker system.
Why?
But now it carried
Maria's
a note of
face
finality
reddened.
that suggested
Because I
he had
could.
made decisions
Because it made me
about how
feel
to handle the
powerful.
crisis. And
what
Lieutenant
did you
Colonel
learn?
Mitchell, I'm going to
That
open
real
this door,
power is
and we're
choosing
going
not
to
to
hurt
hurt
my
someone
office
when you
together.
can.
You're going to remain silent
Wrong,
and
Helen
cooperative,
said flatly.
or this situation will
Real
become
power
much
is
more
making someone
serious.
stronger through
Helen
their pain.
prepared herself for physical
That
confrontation.
kick taught me you were
as
positioned
Morrison's
at my
threat
4
indicated
o'clock.
he was
Weight
willing
on
to
your
use
left
force
foot,
to control
favoring
the
your right
situation.
knee.
Her
The one you
counterintelligence
injured in
training
basic training,
included
but never
extensive
reported because
preparation
you
for
didn't want
exactly
to
this
seem
type
weak.
of crisis.
Maria's
but being
eyes
trapped in a
widened.
small room,
How could you
limited
possibly
her
know about
tactical
my knee?
options. You've
The
been
door lock
compensating for
disengaged
3
with an
years.
electronic click.
I've watched you
And
favor
Morrison
it every
entered the
time
room
you came
with
through
the
the mess
sidearm
hall.
drawn,
Last
but
night,
pointed
that
toward the
knowledge
floor,
could have let me
rather than
cripple you
directly at
permanently
Helen.
with one
His
strike.
expression showed the
Instead,
strain of
I
someone
chose to
operating
protect
under
you despite
extreme
your
stress
cruelty
and making
That's
desperate
power.
decisions.
She turned to
Lieutenant
Jake.
Colonel, you shoved an
Morrison
old
said,
woman for
"We're
being
going to
slow.
walk to my
What does
office
that
where we
make
can
you?
discuss this situation
A coward,
more privately."
Jake said immediately.
I need you to
No.
understand that there
It
are
makes you
consequences
uninformed.
for interfering
You acted
with
on
classified
incomplete
operations.
intelligence.
In
Helen
the field,
stood slowly,
that gets people
keeping her
killed.
hands visible.
Your grandfather
and
never
non-threatening,
acted
while
without
evaluating
complete
Morrison's
intelligence.
mental state,
even
and
if it meant
tactical
waiting in a
positioning.
sniper
He
hide
was
for
clearly
72
desperate and
hours
armed,
without
but he was
moving.
also operating
72
without backup.
hours,
and in a
Bosnia,
facility where other
January
personnel
94,
could potentially intervene.
minus 20 degrees.
Colonel Morrison,
he could
Helen
have taken
said,
the shot after
threatening
12
a federal
hours,
agent
but
conducting
something
an
felt
authorized
wrong.
investigation
So,
is
we
a
waited.
serious crime
60
that will only
hours
make
in,
your
the
situation
target's children
worse.
arrived
I
unexpectedly.
suggest you consider
If Tim had taken
surrendering
that early
and
shot,
cooperating
6 kids
with
would have been
proper
orphaned.
authorities.
Instead,
Morrison's
we waited
hand
another
tightened
12
on his
hours
sidearm
until
as
the target's
Helen's
words
alone.
reinforced the
Captain
gravity
Torres
of the
interrupted.
situation. Ma'am,
Lieutenant
the generals
Colonel,
are here.
You don't understand
The
what
4
you're dealing
service
with.
chiefs were indeed
This goes
walking
far
across
beyond
the training
David
ground,
Carter
but
or your
Helen
investigation.
didn't stop her lesson.
As
She
Morrison
continued
gestured
as if
for
they
Helen
weren't
to
there.
move toward the
Chen,
door,
she
called
heard the
out,
distinctive sound
"You
of
recorded
vehicle
my
engines
humiliation
and radio
last night.
communications.
You thought it
that
was
suggested
entertainment.
significant
What is it
activity
now?"
was developing outside
Derek pulled out
range
his
control,
phone,
showing the video.
The sounds indicated
Evidence.
that security forces
Evidence
were
of how
deploying
wrong
in
I
response
was.
to some type
Evidence
of
of what
emergency
not to be.
situation.
Delete
Morrison
it.
heard the
Ma'am,
same sounds.
delete it.
And his
The
expression
past is
shifted
gone.
to panic.
Only
as he
lessons
realized
remain.
that outside forces
Derek
might
deleted
be
the video
responding
without
to Helen's
hesitation.
situation.
As he did,
What did you
Helen
do?
noticed something.
Who else knows
His
you're
hands
here?
were perfectly
Helen
steady.
maintained
No
steady
tremor,
eye
no
contact
hesitation.
with Morrison while
The nervous
internally
tech specialist was
calculating her
learning
options.
control.
Colonel,
General
I
Anderson
told you that my
approached.
investigation
Instructor
has
Carter,
full
we need to
authorization
discuss
and
resources
support.
for the academy.
Multiple agencies
We
are
have
monitoring
everything
the
we need,
situation.
Helen replied.
Morrison's panic
gesturing
increased
to the
as he
empty training
realized
ground.
that Helen's
Space,
capture might have
students,
triggered automatic
and
alerts
purpose.
to her support
You'll need
network.
equipment,
Modern
facilities,
counterintelligence
support staff.
operations
I need
included
darkness,
sophisticated
silence,
communication
and trust.
protocols.
Everything
that
else is
real-time
luxury.
monitoring of agent
General
safety
Thompson stepped
and mission
forward.
status.
The president
The
wants to
radio
meet you.
communications
There's talk of a
outside
ceremony,
became more
public
intense.
recognition.
With multiple units
Then the
reporting
president
positions
misunderstands
and
what we're
requesting
building
instructions.
here.
Helen said
Morrison
calmly,
could hear references
Ghosts
to range
don't get
control
ceremonies.
and security
They don't get
lockdown
recognition.
procedures
That
they get
indicated the
results.
developing situation
The public should
involved
know
the
that heroes
facility
like
where he
you
was holding
exist.
Helen.
The public
Lieutenant
should sleep
Colonel Mitchell,
soundly, not
Morrison
knowing
said,
we exist.
his voice
That's
now
the
showing
whole
clear
point.
desperation.
Before the generals
We
could
need to
respond,
resolve this
an alarm
situation
sounded
quickly.
across the base.
I'm not going
Not
to
the
prison
standard
for
drill
protecting
alarm,
national
but the one
security
reserved for
interests.
actual threats.
Helen recognized
Colonel
that
Richards's
Morrison's
radio
desperation
crackled
was reaching
life.
dangerous
Colonel,
levels where
we
he
have a
might make
breach.
fatal
North
decisions
perimeter.
to protect himself.
Single individual.
Colonel,
Avoided
the
all
best way to
sensors
resolve
until the
this
final
is for you to
fence.
surrender your
He's-
weapon and cooperate
Sir,
with
he's
investigators.
asking for Phantom
Your
6 by
confession
name.
has already been
Helen's
recorded,
expression
and
didn't
additional
change.
violence will
Dimitri's
only
early.
increase your
He
legal
said
problems.
13 days.
Morrison's eyes
You know
widened
who this
as
is?
Helen revealed
Anderson
that their
demanded.
conversation had
Dmitry
been documented.
Volkov,
Former
what recording?
Spetsnaz Alpha
You don't have
Group,
authorization
the Soviet
to conduct
Union's
surveillance
best tracker.
on military
He's been
personnel.
hunting me since
Helen smiled
1991.
slightly.
As
Helen
Morrison's
turned to her
questions revealed
students.
his failure
Lesson
to
2 is
understand
about to begin.
counterintelligence procedures.
Should we call security?
Colonel,
Torres
as a federal
asked.
agent investigating crimes
let him
against
come.
military
My
personnel,
students need to see what they're
I have
training to
broad
become.
authorization
10
to
minutes
gather
later,
evidence
a figure
using
emerged from the
appropriate
morning
methods.
fog.
Dmitry
The sound of
Volkov
footsteps
was 70
in the corridor
years
outside
old, but
indicated
moved like a
that
man
security
half that
personnel
age,
were
tall,
approaching range
scarred,
control.
with eyes that
Possibly
missed
in
nothing.
response
He
to
stopped
automated
20 meters
alerts
from
from
Helen's
recording
recording
devices,
devices,
but ready.
or predetermined
Hello,
check-in
little ghost,
procedures
he said
with
in
her
accented
support
English.
team.
Hello,
Morrison
old
moved toward
wolf,
the door,
Helen
while keeping
replied.
his sidearm
You're
trained
early.
on Helen.
I
We're
was in
leaving
the
through the
neighborhood.
back exit.
Thought
Any
I'd see
attempt
this
to signal
academy
for
I'm
help
hearing
will have
about.
serious
His eyes
consequences.
swept over the 7 Marines.
Helen followed Morrison's
These are your
instructions
students,
while mentally
children
preparing
playing
for
soldier.
opportunities to escape.
Jake started to
or
step
signal
forward,
for assistance,
but Helen's hand stopped
the
him
approaching
without even
footsteps
looking.
suggested
They're
that
not
help was
playing.
nearby.
They're learning.
But Morrison's
Learning what?
desperation
To
made
hide
him
in shadows?
extremely
To
dangerous
kill from
in the
darkness?
short term. As
To
they
protect
moved through
those who
range
cannot
control
protect
toward the rear
themselves.
exit, Helen
Dmitri
could see
laughed,
through windows
but
that there was no
military
humor in
police
it.
vehicles
protection.
were positioned around
Is
the
that what
building
you call what
perimeter.
happened in
The
Bosnia?
deployment pattern
43
suggested
men
that
dead
security
in one
forces
night.
were conducting
43
a
child
coordinated
traffickers
response to a
eliminated.
known
Helen
crisis
corrected.
rather than routine
Would you
patrol
prefer I had let them
activities.
continue?
Morrison
I
noticed
would
the
prefer
security
you had
presence
followed
and
orders
his
and
panic
extracted
reached
without
critical
engaging.
levels. This is
Whose
impossible.
orders, Dmitri?
How did they
The
respond
ones that
so
came from
quickly?
officials profiting
Helen
from the
decided to
trade,
increase
or the
Morrison's
ones written on the
psychological
faces
pressure
of
by revealing more
317
information
children waiting
about
to
her
be
mission
sold.
support.
The two
Colonel,
circled each other
counterintelligence
slowly, not
operations
aggressively,
include
but like
real-time
old predators
monitoring
recognizing
and automatic
territory.
response
The
protocols.
gathered
Marines watched in
Your
fascination
confession
triggered
as two
immediate
legends
alerts to
sized each
multiple
other up.
agencies. You know why
Morrison
I'm
pushed
here,
open the rear
Dmitri
exit
said,
door
and immediately
Hydra
found
sent
himself
you?
facing three
Hydra
military
pays
police
me.
officers.
There's a difference.
With weapons drawn
Not
and
much
trained
of
on
one.
his position. Dmitri shrugged.
Drop your weapon immediately.
A man must eat.
Place your hands where
Even
we can
old
see
wolves
them.
need sustenance.
The confrontation Helen
And if
had
I
been
said the academy
anticipating for
could
3
use someone
years
with your
was
skill,
finally occurring.
I would
But
say
Morrison's
you're trying to turn me,
desperation
little
made the
ghost.
situation
It won't
extremely
work.
volatile.
I'm
He
not
was trapped
trying to
between
turn
surrender
I'm
and the
offering you what
consequences of his
Hydra never
crimes,
could.
holding a weapon
chance
while
to matter
facing
again,
superior
to
firepower
teach instead
from
of hunt,
professional law
to build
enforcement
instead
personnel.
of destroy.
Colonel Morrison,
The
pretty
lead MP
words,
shouted,
but we both
you
know
are
how this
surrounded and
ends.
outgunned.
Drop your
Yes,
weapon and surrender
Helen agreed.
immediately.
But not
Morrison's
today.
hand trembled.
Today,
as he held his
you're going to
sidearm.
help me teach
His
these
mind
Marines a
clearly
lesson
struggling
about
with
tracking.
impossible choices.
Dmitri
Surrender
raised
meant
an
facing
eyebrow.
courts-martial and
You want me
prison
to
for
train your
treason
students?
and conspiracy.
I want you to hunt
But
them.
resistance
Who,
against
7
multiple
Marines,
armed officers
30
would
minutes
be
head
suicidal.
start.
Anywhere
Helen
on
saw an
base.
opportunity
If even
to
one
de-escalate
evades you
the
for 3
situation
hours,
while ensuring
you walk away,
Morrison's surrender.
and Hydra never
Colonel,
hears from you
your only
again.
option
is
is
when
to
I
surrender
catch them
and
all,
cooperate with investigators.
then we settle our business.
Additional violence will not
Dmitri
change the
considered
evidence
this.
against you
Agreed,
or improve your
but I
legal
choose the
situation.
conditions.
Morrison's
Name
resolve
them.
finally broke
They
under
can
the
use any
combined pressure
resources
of
on
armed
base
officers
except
and the
vehicles
futility
or
of his
outside help.
situation.
He
I
slowly
slowly
lowered
lowered
his
his
sidearm
no
and placed it on
technology,
the ground,
just skill.
then raised his
Helen
hands
looked
and
at her
surrendered.
7 students.
I
Their
surrender,
faces showed
Morrison
fear,
said,
but also
his
determination.
voice barely audible.
You heard him. I
30
want to
minutes
speak
head
with an
start.
attorney.
Beginning
The
now.
military police
The
officers
7 Marines
immediately
scattered
moved
immediately,
to secure Morrison
each
and
heading
his
in
weapon,
different
while
directions.
maintaining
Jake
tactical
went north
awareness
toward the
in
motor
case
pool.
other threats
Maria
were
headed
present.
for the barracks
Their
complex.
professionalism
Derek
and efficiency
disappeared into the
demonstrated
administrative
the high
buildings.
quality of
The
law
others split
enforcement
up,
training
using
at
what
Fort
they'd
Bragg.
learned about the base
Lieutenant
over their
Colonel
years of
Mitchell,
service.
the lead MP,
Dmitri
said,
watched
"Are
them
you
go
injured?
with professional
Do you require
interest.
medical
The
attention?"
technical one will
Helen
try to
felt
use
tremendous
security
relief
cameras to
as
track
her
them.
true identity
The woman
was
will blend with
acknowledged
others
and
in
her safety was
barracks.
assured.
The angry one,
I'm unharmed, Sergeant.
Morrison.
Colonel Morrison
He'll try
made
to think like his
incriminating statements
grandfather.
about David Carter's
Maybe,
case
Helen
that were
said.
recorded on
Or
authorized
maybe they'll
surveillance
surprise us
equipment.
both.
The MP
Children
nodded
don't surprise
and began
me anymore.
coordinating with
These
additional
aren't
security
children.
personnel
They're
who were
Marines who
arriving to
faced death
process
last
the
night
crime scene
and showed up
and
to train
secure
this
evidence.
morning.
That makes
Ma'am,
them
we'll
extraordinary.
need your recording devices
for
and
the
a
next
complete
30 minutes
statement
about
Helen
Colonel
and
Morrison's
Dimitri's stood in
actions and
comfortable
admissions.
silence, while the
As
generals
Morrison
and
was
gathered
placed in
Marines
custody
watched
and read
nervously.
his rights, Helen observed
This wasn't
the
what
systematic
anyone had expected from the first day
military
of Justice Protocol
procedures.
Academy.
Every step
At exactly
was documented.
0800,
all evidence
Dmitri
was properly
began to move.
secured.
He didn't
and
run or
Morrison's
hurry.
constitutional
He simply
rights
walked to
were
where
protected
Derek had
despite his
disappeared
serious
and
crimes.
knelt. The
Examining
transition
ground.
from the chaotic
His
scene
fingers
at range
traced
control
patterns only he
to the
could
sterile
see.
silence
Technical
of the criminal
specialists tried to
investigation
double back
division's
3 times
high
to confuse
security
his
interrogation wing.
Smart
was jarring,
but he steps heavier
Morrison
on his right
sat
foot
alone
when
in
he's
interview
thinking.
room 1.
Makes the pattern
cold
distinctive.
windowless box.
He
that
followed
smelled of
Derek's
stale
trail
coffee
with uncanny
and
precision.
industrial cleaner.
Moving through the administrative
They had
building
stripped him of
like
his
he'd
belt,
lived there for
his
years.
shoelaces,
Within
and
40
his rank
minutes,
insignia,
he found Derek
a
hidden in
standard
a server
suicide
room,
prevention
tucked behind
protocol
equipment
that also
First
served
catch,
to strip a man of
Dmitri
his
announced
dignity.
over the radio.
For
Helen had
45
given him.
minutes, Morrison
6
had
to go.
stewed in that silence.
Derek emerged,
his initial
frustrated
panic
but
hardening
curious.
into a brittle
How?
arrogance.
You think
he was
too much,
Colonel Richard
Dmitri
Morrison,
told him,
the base
thinking
commander
leaves
of
patterns.
Fort Bragg.
Next
he had
time,
friends in the Pentagon.
trust instinct.
He had connections
The
that
next
these
2 hours
low-level
were a
MPs
masterclass
couldn't
in
even
tracking.
imagine.
Dmitri
he convinced
found 4
himself
more
that this was a
Marines with methodical
misunderstanding, or
efficiency.
perhaps a political
Each time
play
he
that he could
explained
maneuver his
exactly
way out
how.
of.
A
He
disturbed
rehearsed his
spider web
opening
here,
lines.
a partial
Do you have
footprint
any
there.
idea
The
who
way
you are
dust had been
dealing with?
displaced on a
And
windowsill.
I demand
But
to
two
speak to the
remained
JAG
hidden.
Corps General
Jake
Counsel
and Maria.
immediately. The heavy
Interesting,
steel door buzzed
Dmitri
and clicked
admitted as the
open.
third hour
Morrison
approached.
straightened his spine.
The bullies are
preparing
proving
to bark
most
orders at
capable.
whatever junior
Former bullies,
investigator
Helen
walked through the
corrected.
door.
People
About
can
time.
change.
I
Not
want
in
you to
one
know
night.
that this
No,
illegal detainment
but they
will
can
end
choose to
your-
change in one
the
moment.
words died in his
The
throat.
rest is just follow
Walking
through.
through the door
With
wasn't
10
a
minutes
nervous
remaining,
CID
Dmitri
agent
stood
or
in
a
the center
military
of the base.
lawyer.
Eyes
It was
closed,
Helen Carter,
listening.
but the
Then he
grease-stained
smiled.
coveralls
The
and the
woman is
smell
in the
of
mess hall,
CLP gun
hiding
oil
where
were
this all
gone.
began.
The diffident,
Poetic
quiet demeanor
but
of the
predictable.
civilian
He
contractor
found Maria
had
in the walk-in
evaporated.
freezer, where
Standing
Helen had
before
hidden
him was a
them the night
woman wearing
before.
the
She
immaculate
emerged
Army Service
shivering,
uniform,
but proud to
of
have
have
lasted
lasted
so
so
long.
long.
The
5
deep blue
minutes
jacket
left,
was
Helen
tailored
announced.
perfectly.
One Marine
the silver
still
oak
hidden.
leaves on her shoulders
Dimitri's
catching
expression
the harsh
serious.
fluorescent light.
This was
On her
professional
chest
pride now.
sat a
He moved
formidable
with
rack
renewed
of ribbons
purpose,
that Morrison
checking every
recognized
place a
with a
person
jolt
could
of
hide.
shock.
3 minutes.
Defense
2
Superior
minutes.
Service Medal,
1 minute.
Bronze Star
The alarm
with Z
sounded.
device.
Jake
and
Morrison
the
had
distinct
evaded
ribbon of the
greatest
National
cracker in
Intelligence
Russian history.
Distinguished Service Medal.
Impossible.
She didn't look like a
Dmitri
mechanic.
muttered.
Then
She
louder,
looked like a predator
Show
who had
yourself,
finally
Morrison.
cornered its prey.
Jake emerged from the last
She
place
carried a
anyone
thick,
would look.
classified
He'd been
dossier
standing
under
under
one
one
arm
sight
and
among
a
the
tablet
Marines
in the
watching
other.
the exercise.
Without a word,
having
she
grabbed
pulled out
the
the metal
different
chair
uniform
opposite
and blended
him
with the
and
crowd.
sat down.
He'd
Her
been there
movements
for 2
possessing
hours,
that same
hiding in
terrifying
plain
economy
view.
he had noticed
His
in the
grandfather's
workshop.
trick. Only
Helen
now
said quietly.
he recognized it for what
Tim
it was.
always said the best
The
hiding
precise,
place was where
calculated
everyone could
motion
see you,
of an elite
but no one would
operator.
look.
Dimitri
Dimitri
stared at
Sarah
Jake
Mitchell
with something
Morrison
approaching
whispered,
respect.
The realization
You didn't
hitting
run
him
like a
you
physical
didn't
blow.
hide. You
Defense
became
Intelligence
background.
Agency.
Instructor
Good
Carter
afternoon,
taught us
prisoner,
this morning.
she said.
We're always being
Her voice was
watched.
unrecognizable.
So I figured
Gone
why
was the
fight
soft,
it? Just
deferential
become someone
tone of
not worth
Helen
watching.
the widow. Dimitri
This
turned to
voice was
Helen.
cold steel,
One evaded me.
authoritative,
By our
and
agreement,
utterly devoid
I
of
walk
empathy.
away.
We
Or
have
you
a
stay
lot
and
to
teach,
cover,
Helen
and very
offered.
little time
Hydra
before the
will
federal
never pay you what
prosecutors
you're
arrive
worth.
to
But
formally
here,
charge you
you could
with
matter.
high treason.
Here, you could create
Morrison tried
legends
to rally
instead of
his
hunting
defenses.
them. He leaned
I've killed
forward,
67
attempting to summon the
people in my
ghost of his
career.
command authority.
And I've
You
killed
can't do this,
73.
Mitchell.
You
Our
entrapped
students
me.
don't need to
That
repeat
recording
our
was
numbers.
obtained without
They
a
need to
warrant
learn
in a
our
secure
skills to prevent
facility.
those numbers.
It's inadmissible.
Dimitri was quiet
Any
for a
lawyer
long
fresh
moment.
out of school
Then he
will
pulled out
tear
a
it apart.
satellite phone and dialed
She didn't
a number.
blink. He spoke
simply
rapid
placed
Russian,
the tablet
then
on the
switched
table
to
and
English
tapped
for
the
Helen's
screen.
benefit. This is
A
Volkov.
document appeared.
Contract
A
terminated.
FISA warrant signed
Phantom
by a
6
federal
is dead.
judge
Has
dated
been
3
for
years
15
prior.
years.
Some
Authorizing
janitor is
full-spectrum
playing
surveillance
surveillance
on
on
Richard Morrison
not
and
worth
his
my time.
associates. He hung up.
We didn't
and
need a
tossed
new
the phone
warrant
into
for
a
today,
nearby
Richard,
trash can.
she said.
I assume
Using
his
instructor
first name with
positions
deliberate
come with
disrespect.
room and board.
Helen
You've been under
smiled.
Title III
Welcome to
electronic
Ghost
surveillance
Protocol
for
Academy,
36
Instructor
months.
Volkov.
We have
The
audio
gathered
of you
Marines
accepting
erupted in
the bribe.
surprise and confusion.
We have
General
video
Anderson
of your
stepped
meetings in
forward.
D.C.
We can't
with the
just
attaché
hire a
from the
Russian
embassy.
operative.
We have the
former
encrypted
Russian
emails you
operative,
sent from your personal
Dimitri
laptop.
corrected. She slid
I
the tablet
defected the
across
moment
the
I threw
table.
that phone
It displayed
away.
a grainy but
Besides,
unmistakable
you need
photo
me.
of Morrison
How
accepting
many of
a
your
briefcase
instructors
from
have
a man in a
successfully
park.
tracked targets
October
through Siberian
14th,
winters and
you
Chechen
sold
mountains?
the specs for the new drone
This is
guidance
highly
system.
irregular.
The
General
price was
Thompson
$50,000.
So is a janitor
Richard,
who's really
you
a
sold out
special
your country
operations
for the
legend,
price of a
Helen
mid-range
pointed out.
sedan.
The academy
Morrison's
isn't
face
about
turned an
regular.
ashen gray.
It's about
he stared at the
effective.
photo, his
Over
mouth
the next
opening
week,
and closing
word
like
spread
a fish
throughout
on
the
dry
military
land.
community.
That Ghost Protocol Academy
That was a
real,
consulting
and it was
fee
unlike
for
anything that had
post-retirement
existed
work.
before. And
No
the Shell
high-tech
Corporation in the Cayman
facilities,
Islands,
no elaborate
Apex
equipment,
Consulting, Sarah
just
asked,
two aging warriors
opening the
teaching
dossier
young
and pulling
Marines
out
to
a
navigate
complex
darkness,
financial
both
flowchart.
literal and
We tracked the
metaphorical.
money laundering, Richard. The first
We
official
know about
class
the
started
payments
with
to Staff
28
Sergeant
volunteers
Webb
from
to
all
falsify
service
inventory
branches.
records.
Helen's original
We know
7
about the
became
payoffs
squad
to
leaders,
the supply
having
officers.
learned more in one night
Morrison
of terror
flinched at
than
Webb's
most
name.
learned in years
Webb
of
is an
training.
idiot.
Jake
He
Morrison
doesn't
proved
anything.
especially adept.
Webb is
His
currently in
natural
interview room
athleticism
4,
combined with
Sarah
his
lied
grandfather's
smoothly,
genetic
her poker
gifts
face
for night
impenetrable,
vision.
making
He's
him
singing like a
exceptional
bird
in darkness
He claims you
operations.
ordered him to harass me
But-
to drive
but
me
more
off the
importantly,
base because I
his
was
transformation
asking too many
from
questions
bully to
about the
protector
inventory
became the model
discrepancies.
for others.
He says you threatened
spent
his pension
extra
if he
hours
didn't
training
comply.
newer students.
It was
especially
a classic
those who
prisoner's
reminded
dilemma
him
of
of Sarah
who he
watched
used
the
to be.
cracks form in
Maria
Morrison's
Santos
resolve.
discovered
he was
she had
sweating
an
now,
uncanny
a
ability
sheen
for
of
sound
perspiration
recognition,
breaking out on his
able to
forehead
identify
despite the chill in the
individuals
room.
by breathing patterns
I
and
was protecting the
heartbeats
base,
from remarkable
Morrison
distances.
stammered,
Pivoting to the
developed a
national
training
security
module
called
called
acoustic
acoustic
signature
signature
recognition.
David Carter
that would become
he was
standard in
unstable.
special operations
He was going to
training
leak sensitive
worldwide.
data.
Derek
I
Chen
had to
created
stop
a
him.
hybrid approach,
Sarah's eyes
combining
narrowed,
traditional
and the
tracking
temperature in
with
the
modern
room seemed to
technology
drop 10
in
degrees.
ways that enhanced
She
rather
leaned
than
in,
replaced
her voice
human
dropping to a
skills.
dangerous
His
whisper.
innovations would
Do not
eventually
say his
revolutionize
name.
surveillance
You don't
countermeasures.
get to say his name.
But it was Helen herself
She pulled a
who
photograph
proved
from the
most
file.
transformative.
A picture
Her
of David
teaching
Carter
method was
in his dress
unorthodox.
uniform.
Instead of
Smiling,
breaking students
holding
down,
his daughter.
she built them up
She
from
slammed
their
it onto the
failures.
metal table
Every
with a sound
mistake
like a
became a
gunshot.
lesson. Every weakness,
David
a
Carter
potential
discovered
strength.
that you were shipping
You
serialized
don't create
weapon
warriors
parts
by
to black
destroying
market
people,
buyers in
she
Eastern
told
General
General
Anderson
Sarah
during one of his
stated, laying out the
observation
facts
visits
with brutal
You
precision.
create them by showing
He found
them
the
they're
discrepancies in the
capable of more than they
logistics
imagined.
database.
3
He
weeks
came
into
to
the
you,
academy's
trusting his
operation,
commander,
an
believing
unexpected
it was a
visitor
clerical
arrived.
error.
Anna
And
Volkov,
instead of fixing
now
it,
Anna
you
Patterson,
reached out to your
drove
handlers
onto base
and
with
asked
her
them how to
17-year-old
silence
daughter
him.
Helena.
Morrison shrank
The girl
back in
was
his
tall,
chair.
athletic,
I didn't tell
with her
them
mother's
to kill
sharp
him.
features
I just
and
wanted him
determined eyes.
discredited.
You
Is it
framed the
true?
master sergeant
Anna
for
asked
treason,
Helen directly.
Sarah continued.
Uncle
Her
Dimitri
voice rising
is
with
teaching
controlled
here.
intensity.
You
He
planted
is,
the files
Helen
on his
confirmed.
computer.
Does
You
that
forged
bother
the
you?
bank transfers.
He
You
hunted
stood
you
in
for
the
30
courtroom
years.
and
You
testified
saved
against
my
a man
life.
who
The
regarded
irony
you as a
is,
mentor. And when he was
substantial.
beaten to death in
Young Helena
Leavenworth
stepped
by an
forward.
inmate paid
I
off
want
by
to
your
apply for the
associates,
academy.
you didn't even send
Helen
flowers to
studied
his
her
funeral.
carefully.
I had no
You're too
choice.
young. Morrison
Minimum
shouted,
age
his
is
composure
18.
shattering.
You were
They
17
threatened
when
me.
you joined the
people
military.
I was working for,
Helena countered.
You don't understand
Lied about
Mitchell.
your age to
They
get in
have
early.
reach.
How do
If
you
I
know
didn't
that?
deliver Carter, they
Mom
were going
kept
to expose
newspaper
me.
clippings.
And who
Every
are
mention
they,
of Phantom
Richard?
6,
Sarah asked
every
softly.
rumor,
The trap
every
was set.
speculation.
This was the moment.
I've been studying
because
you
right
my
now
entire
entire
You are
life,
looking at 25
studying
years
and doing
to
your
life
different
in a
things.
federal
Then let me
supermax.
do.
But the Department
Helen
of
looked at
Justice
Anna,
might,
who nodded.
might
She's been
consider
training
taking
since
the
she
death
could walk.
penalty off the
Dimitri
table if
may
you
have
give us
hunted
the
you,
network.
but he also taught
Not
his
the
niece's
small
daughter
fish.
everything
I want
he
the
knew about
handlers.
survival.
I want the names of the
Not
other
everything,
officers you compromised.
Dimitri said. Appearing
Morrison
from
looked
nowhere,
at the mirror
as
on
was
the
his
wall,
habit, knowing his
but enough to
reflection
make
was
her
just a
interesting.
facade for the cameras
The
recording
reunion
every
between
twitch
Dimitri
of his
and
face.
Anna was touching
He looked
in its
back at
simplicity.
Sarah, the woman
The
he
old
had
tracker
dismissed as
hugged
a
his
great
great
niece
niece
with
with
genuine
genuine
affection.
affection. 3 years.
Then turned to
He
Helena
realized
with
now that he
professional
had been living in a
assessment.
cage with a tiger.
Show me what you
mistaking
remember,
it for
he
a
said.
house cat.
For the next hour,
his
Helena
arrogance
demonstrated
finally
skills
dissolving
that put
into
some of the
total
Marine
defeat.
students to
If I
shame.
talk,
I
tracking,
need protection,
evasion,
acoustic
witness
targeting,
protection
for
even
my
basic
family.
pressure point
You're in no
techniques.
position to
When she
negotiate
finished,
terms.
both Helen and
Sarah
Dimitri
said,
were
pulling a
impressed.
notepad from her pocket.
3 months.
But if
Helen
the intel
decided.
is good,
You train with the
I'll
Marines
speak
for
to the
3 months.
prosecutor. If you
Start
keep
talking.
up, you can
Who is
enter
the
the
contact
academy
at
on
the
your
embassy?
18th birthday.
Victor Volkov.
Helena's face
Morrison
lit up.
whispered.
I
He
won't
runs the
disappoint you.
logistics desk.
It's not
but
about
he's not the
disappointing
top.
me.
It's about honoring
there's
those
a general
who
at
came
the
before.
Pentagon. Your mother
In
survived
procurement.
hell. Make
Sarah's
sure her
pen
sacrifice
paused.
means
This was
something.
it. The thread
As the
that
weeks
would
turned
unravel
into
the
months,
entire
the Ghost
sweater.
Protocol Academy
Name,
evolved
she
from an
commanded.
experiment into
General
an
Sterling.
institution. Morrison
The
choked
Pentagon
out.
quietly
He's the
funded
one who
expansions.
introduced me to
Though
Volkov.
Helen insisted
He
on
takes a cut of
maintaining
the
the
every
minimalist
ship
approach.
approach.
Sarah
No
wrote the name
fancy
down,
buildings
her face
or
impassive,
high-tech simulators.
though internally she
Just
felt a
practical
surge of
training
triumph.
in real
General
world
Sterling was
conditions.
untouchable.
The
Until
accident
now.
happened during week
With
12.
Morrison's testimony,
A night
and
training
the financial
exercise
records
went
she had
wrong
gathered,
when a sudden
they could
storm
take down
hit
a corruption
Camp Pendleton.
ring that spanned
Zero
3
visibility,
continents.
60
She stood
knot
up,
winds,
gathering her
horizontal
files.
rain.
The interrogation
Two
was
students,
effectively
Roberts
over.
and Kim,
the JAG
were
lawyers
separated
and
from
FBI
their unit
agents
in
would
the
handle
mountains
the formal
east of
deposition.
Base.
Radio
She had what she
communications were down.
You know the irony,
Standard
Richard?
search and
Sarah
rescue
said,
couldn't operate
looking down
in
at the broken man in the orange
Helen
jumpsuit.
suited up without
You
hesitation.
spent 3 years
At
worrying
58,
that I was
she
incompetent,
shouldn't have been able to
that
do
I
what
would blow
came
up a
next.
rifle or
But
mess up a
muscle
scope.
memory doesn't age the
You were
same
so
way
focused
muscles
on my
do.
hands that you
She
never looked at
disappeared
my
into the
eyes.
storm with only basic
She walked to the
gear
door
and
and
an
signaled the
old-fashioned
guard.
compass.
Wait,
Jake
Morrison
insisted on
pleaded,
going
his
with
voice
her.
trembling.
You trained us for this.
What happens
he
to me
argued.
now?
Let us help.
Sarah paused
This isn't
in the doorway.
training, Morrison.
The silhouette
This is
of the
real.
ghost of the battlefield.
That's why you need
framed by the
backup.
harsh
My
hallway
grandfather
light.
wouldn't let you go alone.
Now?
Helen
She said,
studied him
her
for a
voice
moment,
echoing
then
the
nodded.
finality of a judge's
Gear up.
gavel.
We
Now
leave in 2
you
minutes.
disappear.
They
And
went
David
into the
Carter
storm
gets his
together.
name back.
Teacher and student,
The heavy steel
legend
door
and
slammed
legacy.
shut.
The
Leaving
wind was
Morrison
so
alone
strong
with
it
his
could knock a
reflection
person off
and
their
the crushing
feet.
weight of his
The rain
choices.
so heavy,
The
it
next
was like
several
walking
hours
through
at
a
Fort Bragg
waterfall.
were consumed with
But
evidence
Helen moved
processing,
through it like she was
witness
born
interviews,
to it,
and
Jake
coordination
followed,
between multiple
trusting her
military
completely.
justice agencies.
They found
Helen's
Robert's
3
first
years of undercover
hypothermic
investigation
and disoriented,
had produced
sheltering
extensive
in a shallow
documentation
cave.
of Morrison's
Helen
criminal
immediately
activities,
began medical
but
treatment,
translating
while
that
Jake went
evidence
after
into
Kim.
successful
Using the search
prosecution
pattern Helen
required
had taught
careful
him.
attention
He
to
found
legal
her 20
procedures.
minutes later.
Helen was
injured but
debriefed
alive,
by
her ankle
counterintelligence
broken from a
specialists
fall,
who documented
the journey
every
back took
aspect of
4
her
hours.
investigation and
4
Morrison's
hours of
confession.
carrying injured Marines
The recording
through a storm
devices
that
she
would
had
have
used
killed most
provided
people.
clear
But
audio
Helen and
evidence
Jake
of Morrison's
brought them
admission
home
that
alive.
David Carter had been
Colonel
framed
Richards
to
met them at
protect
the
illegal
Base Medical
intelligence
Center.
operations.
That was insane.
The evidence
Heroic,
review revealed
but
that
insane.
Morrison's conspiracy
Helen was
involved
exhausted,
unauthorized
but unbowed.
cooperation
It was
with
necessary.
foreign intelligence
We
services
don't leave
and
people
violations
behind.
of multiple
You could have
federal
died
laws
out there,
governing
but we
military
didn't.
operations.
And now every student
David
at the
Carter's
academy
discovery
knows
of these
that we
illegal
practice what we
activities had
preach.
made him a
That
target
changes
for
everything.
everything.
She was
leading
right.
to the fabricated
After that
treason
night,
charges that
the
destroyed
Academy's
his life.
reputation
Military
solidified.
investigators
These
worked
weren't
through
just
the night
instructors
to analyze
teaching
3
theory.
years of evidence
They were
that Helen had
practitioners who would
gathered
risk
during
everything
her
for their
undercover
students.
assignment.
6
Every
months into the
document,
Academy's
recording,
operation
and
the real
observation
test came.
was cataloged
A Hydra
and prepared
cell
for
attempted
use
to
in
infiltrate
court-martial
Camp
proceedings
Pendleton,
against
targeting
Morrison
the Academy
and any
specifically.
co-conspirators
12
who could be
operatives,
identified.
highly trained.
Chief Torres
Using
was
the
among
cover of a
personnel
congressional
interviewed about
inspection
Helen's
visit.
performance during
They
her
didn't
time
expect
as a
the
civilian
janitors,
contractor.
groundskeepers, and
His
food
testimony
service
provided
workers to be
important Academy
context
graduates
about
placed
her
specific
exceptional
technical
watch for
skills
such
and professional
infiltration.
behavior.
The
that
attack
had
came
initially
at 0
raised
to
Morrison's
300
suspicions.
hours.
I
Or
knew
it would
Carter
have,
was
if
exceptionally
Helen hadn't
skilled,
already
Torres
positioned
told
her
investigators.
students.
The Hydra
But I
operatives
never
walked into a
suspected she
trap
was
they
an
couldn't see
undercover
coming.
officer.
Every
Her
shadow
cover
held a
identity
ghost.
was completely
Every corner
convincing,
concealed a
and her
protector.
dedication to the work
takedown
was
was
genuine.
swift.
Staff
Silent
Sergeant
and
Webb was
complete.
also interviewed.
No shots
though his
fired,
testimony
no
revealed
alarms
his own
raised.
prejudices and
12
unfounded
Hydra
suspicions,
operatives captured
rather than
without a
providing
single
useful
casualty on
intelligence
either
about
side.
the actual
How?
conspiracy.
The Hydra leader
His
demanded
harassment
as
of
he was
Helen had
processed.
inadvertently
We had
provided
perfect
cover for her
intelligence.
investigation.
We knew
by
your
making her
patterns,
appear
your
vulnerable
weaknesses,
and isolated.
Helen smiled coldly.
I thought she was suspicious
You had
because
intelligence
of her
on
husband's
Phantom 6,
conviction,
but
Webb
I'm not
admitted
her
to
anymore.
investigators.
I'm something better.
I never
I'm a
considered that
teacher,
she might be
and I've taught
investigating the people
318
who framed
students
him
so far.
The investigation
Each one
expanded
is now a
rapidly
ghost.
as Morrison's
Each one is
confession
watching.
led to
Good
examination
luck
of
finding
other
them all.
personnel who might
The
have been
Hydra
involved
network
in the
began to
conspiracy.
collapse after that.
Military
Not
intelligence
through military
databases
action,
were searched
but
for
through
evidence
paranoia.
of unauthorized
They couldn't
foreign
trust anyone.
contacts,
Couldn't
and
predict
illegal
where the next
intelligence
ghost
sharing
might be
that
hiding.
Morrison had
The
referenced
janitor might
during
be an
his
academy
breakdown.
graduate.
Helen's
The
real
secretary,
service record
the
was
mechanic,
finally
the
revealed
cook,
to Fort Bragg
anyone
personnel
could be a
who had
ghost.
known her only
General
as a civilian
Anderson visited the
contractor.
academy
Lieutenant
on its first
Colonel Sarah
anniversary.
Mitchell's distinguished
The 28
career
original students
included
had
multiple
become
classified
200.
operations.
The
and
program had expanded to
commendations
3
for
other
exceptional
bases,
service
all
and
following Helen's
counterintelligence
minimalist
activities.
model.
The
revelation that Helen
revolutionized
Carter
special
was actually a
operations training,
decorated
he told
military
Helen.
officer
The president
conducting
wants
an
to award
authorized
you the Medal of
investigation
Freedom. Created
I already have
significant
all the
impact
medals
throughout
throughout
Fort
Fort Bragg.
Bragg replied.
Personnel
Give it to
who
Jake
had witnessed
Morrison.
Webb's harassment
He's the
felt
future of the
shame about
program.
their failure
Morrison,
to intervene. The
while
Marine
others
who shoved
expressed
you,
admiration
the Marine who
for
learned
her
from his
dedication
mistakes
and
the
professionalism.
Marine who went into a
As
storm
evidence
to save
processing
others.
continued,
The Marine
the
who was
scope of
becoming
Morrison's
the instructor
criminal
his
activities
grandfather
became
would
clear.
be proud of.
He had indeed
Jake had
been
indeed
cooperating
flourished.
with foreign
His natural
intelligence
leadership,
services,
tempered by
providing
humility,
classified
learned through
information
failure,
in
made him
exchange
an
for
ideal
payments
instructor
that he had
candidate.
concealed through
He was scheduled to
sophisticated
take over the
financial
East Coast
schemes.
Academy when
David
it opened.
Carter's discovery
Maria
of
Santos
Morrison's
had been
illegal
recruited by
activities
naval
had
intelligence
occurred during a
her
routine
acoustic
security
skills
audit
invaluable
that identified
for
suspicious
submarine
communication
detection
patterns
and underwater
unexplained
surveillance.
financial
But
transactions.
she returned to teach monthly
Carter's intention to
workshops,
report
never
his findings
forgetting
through
where her
proper
transformation
channels had
began.
triggered Morrison's
Derek
decision
Chen had
to
developed
frame
an
him for
entirely
treason.
new field of study.
The evidence showed that
integrated
Morrison had
tactical
fabricated
analysis
documents and
combining
manipulated
human
witnesses
intuition
to
with
create
technological
the appearance that
capability.
David Carter was selling
The NSA had
secrets
tried to
foreign
recruit him
agents.
repeatedly,
The conspiracy
but he chose
had
to
been
stay at the
sophisticated
academy.
enough to fool
Dmitry
military
Volkov had become
investigators,
something
and
no one
result in
expected.
Carter's conviction
Beloved
and
his
subsequent
gruff
death in
exterior
prison.
hid a genuine
Helen's
care for his
investigation
students.
had methodically
His tracking
uncovered
classes
the
were
truth
legendary,
through 3 years
but it was
of
his
patient
life
intelligence
lessons that
gathering
students remembered
and careful
most.
documentation.
Every choice leaves a
Her
trail.
success in
he would
exposing
say.
Morrison's crimes
Make sure
would
yours
restore
leads
David
somewhere
Carter's
worth going.
reputation.
Young
and
Helena
provide
Patterson
closure
had
for
not
a
only
family
met
destroyed by
expectations,
false
but exceeded them.
accusations.
The
On her
military
18th
justice
birthday,
process
she
moved
formally
forward
entered
with
the
courts-martial
academy and
proceedings
completed the
against
course in
Morrison
record time.
and several
She would eventually
co-conspirators
become
who
the
were
youngest
identified
instructor
during
in
the
expanded
academy's history,
investigation,
specializing
the
in what
evidence
she
Helen
called
had gathered
inherited
would be crucial
instinct,
in securing
teaching students to
convictions
recognize
and ensuring
and develop
appropriate
genetic
punishment for their
predispositions
crimes.
for certain
Military
skills.
leadership at Fort
The
Bragg
second
issued
anniversary
public
of the
statements
academy brought an
acknowledging that
unexpected
David Carter
guest.
had been
The
wrongfully
president
convicted
himself arrived,
and expressing
not with
regret for the
fanfare, but
injustice that
quietly,
had destroyed his
wanting
life
to
and
observe
reputation.
without disrupting
The
training.
apology was
He
formal
watched Helen lead a
recognition
night
that
navigation
military justice
exercise.
systems had failed.
70-year-old
in
Dmitri
Carter's case.
demonstrated
A special
tracking
ceremony was
techniques,
organized
and
to
Jake
restore
Morrison
David
teach
Carter's
close
honor
quarters combat
and
with a
recognize
patience
Lieutenant
his
Colonel
young
Mitchell's
Mitchell
exceptional
could never have
service in
managed.
uncovering the truth.
This is not what I
The
expected.
ceremony would
The
include
president admitted to
presentation
Helen.
of posthumous
I thought it would
awards
be
for
more
Carter and
military.
public recognition of
It is
Mitchell's
military,
courage
Helen
and
replied.
dedication.
Just not the kind
Helen
you're used to.
participated in
We're not
planning the
creating super
ceremony
soldiers.
while processing
We're
her
creating
own emotions
superhumans.
about the successful
People who can fight
conclusion
if needed,
of her
but
3-year
choose
mission.
protection over
The
aggression,
investigation had been
wisdom over
personally
violence.
challenging and
it
requiring
works.
her to endure
In 2
harassment
years,
and suspicion
Academy graduates
while
have
maintaining
prevented
focus on her
17
ultimate
terrorist
objectives.
attacks.
Rescued
The ceremony
43
took place on the main
kidnapped
parade
victims
ground
and
at
identified
Fort
over
Bragg,
100
with hundreds
embedded
of
foreign
military
assets,
personnel in
all without
attendance to
firing a
witness
single
the
shot
restoration
or
of
making a
David
single
Carter's
headline.
honor.
The
Ghosts
formal
indeed,
military setting
the president
provided
murmured.
appropriate
What do you
dignity
need from me?
for acknowledging the
Nothing.
injustice that
The
had
less
been
official
corrected.
attention we receive,
Helen wore her
the more
military
effective we
uniform
become.
for the first
Ghosts
time in
work
3
best
years,
when no one believes
displaying
they
the rank and
exist.
decorations
That evening,
that reflected
Helen
her
stood in the mess hall
distinguished
where it
service
all
record.
began.
The
It had
transformation
been renovated
from
after the
civilian
contractor
incident
to
but
decorated
she'd insisted
officer
on keeping
was
one
dramatic
thing.
evidence
The
of
spot
her
where Jake had
successful
shoved her
undercover
was
mission.
marked with a small
Base
plaque that
Commander
read,
General Patricia
"Every
Williams
transformation
presided over the
begins with a
ceremony,
choice."
delivering
Jake found
remarks
her
that
there,
acknowledged
holding
both
2
the
cups of
injustice
coffee.
done to David
Colombian,
Carter and
the
single
exceptional
origin
service
just how
performed by
you like
Lieutenant
it.
Colonel
They
Mitchell
stood in
uncovering
comfortable
the
silence.
truth.
Teacher and student,
Today we
past
correct
and
a
future.
grievous wrong.
Do you ever
General
regret
Williams
it?
announced
Jake
to the
asked.
assembled formation.
Coming out of hiding,
Master Sergeant
I
David
regret
Carter
that it
was a
took me
loyal
15
soldier
years
who
to
died
realize
believing
hiding
his
wasn't
own
living.
military had
Your
abandoned
grandfather
him.
tried to tell me
Lieutenant
in his
Colonel
letters,
Sarah Mitchell
but I
spent
wasn't
3
ready to
years
hear
of her
it.
life ensuring
He
that
wrote to
truth
you
would ultimately prevail.
every month for 15
David
years.
Carter's
I never
posthumous
replied,
awards
but
included
he kept
restoration
writing,
of his
telling
rank
me
and
about
benefits,
you,
about your
along with
sister,
recognition
about
that
the
his
world
death in
moving
prison was
forward.
the result of
He
criminal
knew I was
conspiracy
alive.
rather
He
than
was the only
legitimate
one who
conviction
never
for treason.
doubted. The military
pulled out a
justice
worn
system had
envelope.
failed him.
He left
but
this
it was
for
now
you.
acknowledging
Mom
that
gave it to
failure
me after she
publicly.
heard about the academy.
Helen accepted
She
recognition
said Grandpa
for her
made her promise
undercover
to deliver it if you
investigation.
ever surfaced.
But her remarks focused
Helen
on
opened
David
it with
Carter's
trembling
vindication
hands.
rather
Inside
than her
was a
own
photo.
accomplishments.
Tim Morrison's team
Master
from
Sergeant
Bosnia,
Carter maintained
with
his
Helen at the
innocence
center
until the day he
and a
died.
simple note.
Today, the
You were
military
never
he
just a
served with
ghost.
honor
You were our
finally
light in the
acknowledges that he
darkness.
was telling
Time
the
to
truth.
shine again.
Morrison's
Tim,
conviction and sentencing
he loved
provided
you.
formal
Jake said
justice
simply,
for his crimes,
not
but Helen knew
romantically,
that no legal
but as a warrior
proceeding could
loves their
restore
commander.
David
Carter's
with
life,
absolute trust
or
and
repair
respect.
the damage done to his
I loved him
family.
too.
The best
Helen
she could
admitted.
accomplish was
All of
ensuring
them.
that his name
That's
was
why
cleared
losing them
and
broke
his
something
service
in
was
me that
properly
took 15
honored.
years
The
to
ceremony
heal.
concluded with the
But you did
placement of
heal.
David Carter's
No.
name on Fort
I
Bragg's
learned to
memorial
function despite
wall.
the break.
Recognizing
There's a difference,
his service and
but teaching,
sacrifice,
building
while
this
acknowledging
academy,
the injustice
watching
of his
you all
wrongful
transform,
conviction.
his
That's
Purple
been better
Heart
than
and other
healing.
decorations
It's been
were
purpose.
restored to honor status.
A knock at the door interrupted
Helen
them.
stood at attention
Maria
as the
Santos
base formation
entered with
rendered
rendered
honors
Chen
to David
and the
Carter's
other original
memory.
7.
The soldiers
Now
who
all
had served under
instructors or
Morrison's
instructor
command
candidates
now understood that they had
Maria
been led
said
by a
formally,
traitor
then
who had
broke into a
destroyed an
grin.
innocent man to
We
protect
wanted
his
to
own
thank you.
criminal activities.
2 years ago,
the flag
we were
ceremonies
bullies who
included
shoved lowering
an old
and
woman.
raising the American
Today
flag
we're
to
protectors.
half-staff
That
and back into
transformation is
full
because
position.
of you.
symbolizing the
shook her
military's
head.
acknowledgement
The transformation
of
was
error
your
and
choice.
commitment to upholding
I just
justice.
provided the opportunity.
The formal military
Still,
ritual
Derek
provided
added,
appropriate
holding up a
solemnity
small
for the
box.
occasion.
We got you
Following the
something.
ceremony,
Inside
Helen met
was
with
a new
David Carter's
Carter's coin.
surviving family
One
members
side
who
showed
had
the
traveled
Gold
to Fort
Protocol
Bragg for
Academy
the vindication
insignia,
of their loved
a
one's
shadow
memory.
protecting a
The
flame.
meeting was emotional,
The other
but
side
healing,
had 7
providing
names.
closure for
The
relatives
original
who had
students,
maintained faith
surrounding
in
a
David's
simple
innocence
inscription.
despite his conviction.
From darkness,
Thank you for never
light.
giving up, David's sister
Helen
told
held the
Helen.
coin tightly.
We knew he
Emotion
wasn't a
threatening
traitor,
to
but we
overwhelm
had
her
no way to
usual
prove
control.
it. Your investigation
Thank you.
gave us back our brother's
There's more,
honor, Jake said.
Helen's response was simple,
The Pentagon
but
approved your
heartfelt.
teaching methodology
Master Sergeant
for all
Carter
special
died
operations
protecting his
training.
country's secrets
The Ghost
from real
Protocol is now
traitors.
standard
The least
across
I could
all
do was
branches.
ensure the truth
And,
was revealed.
Maria added,
The administrative
creating a
processing
permanent
following
position.
Morrison's conviction,
Director of
included
Asymmetric
comprehensive
Warfare
review
training
of all cases
It's
he had
yours
been
if you
involved
want
in
it
during
Helen
his
looked
career.
at each of them.
Military
These Marines
investigators
who had begun
wanted
as
to
her
ensure
tormentors
that
and became
no
her
other
legacy.
innocent personnel
I'm a janitor
had been
who teaches on the
victimized by his
side.
criminal
I don't need
activities.
titles.
Helen's
But we
transition
need
back to
you,
regular
Jake
military
said.
duties
The
required
military needs
adjustment
you.
after
The
3
country
years of
needs
living
you.
under deep cover.
Helen was about to
The
respond
psychological
when Dimitri
challenges
burst
of
in,
maintaining
moving
a false
faster than
identity
she'd seen
for
him
extended
move in
periods
months.
were
We
recognized
have a
by
problem,
military medical
a big
personnel
problem,
who provided
He handed her a
appropriate
satellite
support
phone.
services.
On the other end
the
was a voice she
counterintelligence
hadn't heard
community
in
studied
30
Helen's
years.
investigation
Hello,
as a model
Phantom
for future
6,
undercover
the voice said
operations
in accented
involving
English.
military
Or should I
personnel.
say,
Her success
Instructor
in maintaining
Carter,
cover while
Helen's
gathering
blood
decisive
ran
evidence
cold.
provided valuable
Nikolai,
lessons for
you're
training
supposed to
future
be dead.
agents. As
Fort
are
Bragg
you,
implemented new
but here we
security
are,
procedures
two ghosts
designed to
still
prevent
haunt
the
the
kind
world.
of criminal conspiracy
I have something you
that
want.
Morrison had operated
43
for years.
children,
The
ages
reforms
7 to
included
12.
enhanced oversight
Familiar
of personnel,
ages, yes,
with access
you
to
have
classified
72 hours
information
to come
and
alone,
improved
or
detection
history
systems
repeats
for
itself.
unauthorized
The
activities.
line went dead.
Helen remained at
stood
Fort
frozen
Bragg
for several
moment,
months,
then
to
began
assist with
moving
ongoing
with purpose.
investigations
Morrison
and ensure
contact
complete
resolution
Pentagon.
of all
Tell them
issues
Ghost
related
Protocol
to
is going
Morrison's
active.
criminal activities.
Santos,
Her
I need
expertise and
satellite imagery
institutional
of
knowledge
everything
were
within
valuable
500
resources
miles
for
of the
military
coordinates I'm about to
investigators.
give you.
The final
Chen,
phase of evidence
hack into every
processing
database
revealed
you
the
can
full scope
and
of
find out
Morrison's
how
betrayal,
Nikolai Volkov
including
survived.
specific intelligence that had been
Volkov,
compromised,
Dimitri's face was
and
pale.
operations that
My
had been
brother is
endangered by
alive.
his illegal
Apparently
activities.
so, Helen said
The damage
grimly.
assessment
And he's
required
recreating
coordination
Bosnia
with
to
multiple
draw me out.
intelligence agencies.
You can't go alone.
Helen's service
Jake
record was
protested.
updated
That's
to
what he
reflect her
expects.
exceptional
No,
performance
Helen
during the
smiled
undercover
coldly.
investigation.
He expects Phantom
the
6 to
commendation
come
she
alone,
received
but I'm not
recognized
Phantom
both her
6
professional
anymore.
competence
I'm Instructor
and personal
Carter,
courage,
and instructors
can never go
conducting such a
anywhere without
challenging
their
and
students.
dangerous mission.
She looked at the
David
original
Carter's
7,
family
now
established
trained,
a scholarship
capable,
fund in
and
his
ready.
memory.
Lessons
To
are
support
over.
military
Time for the
families
final
affected by
exam.
wrongful accusations.
What's the exam?
Or
Maria
criminal
asked,
misconduct? Though she already knew
The
the
fund
answer.
would provide resources
We're going to
for
save
legal
43
defense
children,
and family support
capture or
during
eliminate
investigations
international
and
trafficking
legal
proceedings,
proceedings,
and prove
Helen
that
contributed
ghosts
to the
don't work
scholarship
alone
fund
anymore,
and
We work
participated in
as
its
a team.
annual award ceremony.
Jake stepped forward,
maintaining her
all of
commitment
us,
to supporting
all of
military
us,
families,
plus 70 more
who face
graduates I'm
challenges
calling
similar
in.
to what
Nikolai
David Carter's
expects one
relatives had
ghost.
endured.
He's getting
The
100.
military justice reforms
Dimitri's hands were
implemented
clenched
after
into
Morrison's
fists.
conviction.
My brother
included
I thought he
enhanced
died in
protections for
Chechnya.
whistleblowers.
So did
and
everyone.
improved
But he's been
procedures for
building a new
investigating
network,
allegations
learning
of
from
criminal
Hydra's
misconduct
mistakes.
by senior
This is his
personnel.
coming out party.
The
Using
changes were
children's
designed
bait
to
to
prevent
draw out
future
the one
cases
person
like
who
David
stopped him
Carter's.
before.
Helen's
Then we
final
stop him
report
again,
on the
Jake
investigation
said firmly.
documented
Helen
lessons
looked at
learned
each of them.
and
This won't be
recommendations for
training.
improving
This will be real
counterintelligence
combat.
operations.
Some of you might
Her
not
insights
come
were
home.
incorporated
With respect,
into training
ma'am,
programs
Maria said,
and operational
we didn't come home
procedures
2 years
used by
ago
military
either.
intelligence
We came home
agencies.
different.
Better.
6 months after
Because
Morrison's
of you.
conviction,
Now
Helen
it's our
received
turn
orders
to
for
pay
her
that
next
forward.
assignment with military intelligence
Over the next
command.
24 hours,
her success
Camp
in
Pendleton
Fort Bragg
became
had
a staging
established her
ground
reputation
for the largest
as one of the
gathering
military's
Ghost
most
Protocol
effective
graduates in the
counterintelligence
Academy's short
specialists.
history. The day
They
before her
came from
departure
every
from Fort
base,
Bragg,
every
Helen
branch,
visited David
dropping
Carter's
everything
memorial
to
wall
answer the
placement
call.
one final
Helena
time.
Patterson arrived with
The
her
bronze
mother, Anna,
nameplate bearing
both
his name
insisting
and
on
service
joining the
record was
operation.
properly positioned
Those
among
children
other
could be me,
soldiers who had
Anna
made
said
the
simply.
ultimate
I can't
sacrifice
sit
for their
this
country.
out.
A
The
small
Pentagon
challenge
initially
was
resisted,
placed at the base
wanting
of
to send
David Carter's
conventional
memorial steel nameplate,
but Helen stood firm,
bearing the inscription,
"Conventional
Ghost
forces will get those
77.
children killed."
Helen's operational
This requires
designation
ghosts,
during her investigation.
people who can operate in
the
darkness
coin would remain
without
as a symbol of her
technology,
commitment
without
to finding
support,
truth,
without
and ensuring
making a sound.
justice. General
Helen's
Anderson
departure from
finally
Fort Bragg
agreed.
marked
What
the
do
end
you
of her
need?
most significant
Transport to these
professional
coordinates.
accomplishment.
Helen
But
showed him a map.
she knew that David
Then
Carter's
nothing.
vindication
No
was
oversight,
more important
no
than any
interference,
personal recognition
no
she might
extraction
receive.
plan.
Justice
We
had
go
been
in
served
as
through
ghosts,
professional
we come out as
investigation
ghosts,
and proper
or we
legal
don't come
procedures.
out at all.
The military
48
community
hours
at
later,
Fort Bragg
102
had learned
Academy
important
graduates
lessons about
stood
the
in a
dangers
warehouse
of criminal
5 miles
conspiracy
from
within
Nikolai's
their
compound,
ranks,
and the
Helen had
importance of
spent the day
supporting
planning,
personnel
using every
who
skill
report
from
misconduct
40 years
through
of
proper
experience.
channels. He
Morrison's
has 60
conviction
operatives sent a clear
she
message
explained.
about accountability.
All former special
Helen's
forces from various
counterintelligence
countries.
career
The
continued.
children
with
are
new
held in 3
assignments and
separate
challenges,
buildings to
but her
prevent a
success in
single
exposing
rescue.
Morrison's
He expects me to
conspiracy
come through the main
established her
gate,
reputation
probably
as
with
someone
someone
willing to
willing to
pursue
So
truth,
we don't use the
regardless of
gate,
personal
Jake
cost
suggested,
or
we don't use
professional
any
risk.
traditional approach.
The ghost of the
Helen
battlefield had
confirmed.
completed her
We
most
become
important
the night
mission,
itself.
restoring honor
The
to an
operation
innocent
began at
soldier
0200
and bringing
hours.
justice to
No
those who
night
had
vision,
betrayed their
no
oaths
radios,
and their country.
no technology
David
that
Carter's
could be
memory
detected
was
or
finally
jammed.
protected
Just
by the
humans
truth
trained
that
to
Helen had
navigate
spent
darkness
3 years
using vision,
uncovering.
smell, and instinct. Jake led Alpha
The
Team,
stories
20
end
graduates,
here,
including
but
Maria
the
and
journey
Derek, toward
continues.
the first building.
Many new
They moved
episodes
like
are
liquid
waiting
shadow,
for you.
using techniques
And
Helen
if
had
you
drilled into
enjoy,
them for 2
please
years.
take a moment
Dimitri
to
led Bravo
like,
Team to the second
subscribe
building.
to
His
our
tracking
AV
skills
Story
reversed
channel
to become
and
infiltration
turn on the bell.
expertise.
See
His team
you in the
included
next
Helena
story.
Patterson, who